We moved into my grandparents' house in 2016 when they decided to downsize. I was 9. They had built the place in the early 90s, and it sits on 5 acres out on the outskirts of a small southern town. Woods and open fields stretch around it, and a slow, muddy river winds past our southern fence line. On 2 sides, our property touches our only neighbor's land, an odd, crooked patch of acreage with a house that felt like it was sinking into the ground. That house was old. The original farmhouse had been built in the 1920s, and over the years, it had been added onto in all the wrong ways, like someone stapled extra rooms together without a plan. The siding was discolored and soft-looking. Every time you glanced at it, it just looked wet, even on dry days. The yard was a nightmare. Overgrown bushes tangled with vines, broken fountains surrounded by weeds, gnomes missing heads, and old trash that looked like it had been there for years. Grocery bags flapped in the tree branches. A rusted lawnmower sat in the middle of the grass like it had died mid-job and was never moved. It was the place that made you want to hold your breath when you walked by. At the time, the house was home to 2 elderly sisters, Violet and Agnes, and 3 kids. Violet was the quieter of the 2, always sitting on the porch in a faded green rocking chair, just watching the trees. Agnes was sharper and more active, but she still moved like her bones hurt. Both women were in their 70s at least. The kids were their grandchildren. The boy, Liam, was my age and in my grade at school. The other 2 were girls named Allison and Kelsey. They were the same age as my younger sister. Liam was weird. I didn't like him, and I didn't want to hang out with him. But we were in the same class, so we got lumped together a lot. He took that as permission to just show up at my house whenever he wanted. No knocking or texting. I'd be playing a game in my room and turn around, and he'd just be there. One time, I looked out my window and saw him doing cannonballs in our pool. Another time, he walked straight into the kitchen, opened our fridge, and started eating a slice of leftover pizza with his hands like it was no big deal. When we hung out, he wasn't fun. He was obsessed with anime, like really obsessed, but I didn't watch any, so I had no idea what he was talking about. He'd say weird lines in Japanese and get mad when I didn't laugh. Sometimes he'd get this look in his eyes, like he was imagining something violent. One time he chased me with a pair of sharp garden shears, swinging them around and laughing like it was a game. Another time we were on an old wooden bridge that crosses the creek near the back of our properties, and I swear he tried to push me in. He claimed it was a joke, but the way he smiled after, I knew he meant it. The twins were different, quiet and almost invisible. Their clothes were always dirty, and they had speech impediments that made it hard to understand them. It was obvious nobody at home was helping them. Their voices were garbled like they were still toddlers, even though they were 7. They flinched easily, and they always looked hungry. Their dad was in and out of jail, so he wasn't around. And that brings us to the mom, Teresa. The first time I saw her, she was trying to hook a hose up to the spigot at the edge of their property, right near our side yard. She was tall, way taller than anyone else in her family, and heavy set, with long, thick, curly black hair and glasses that looked like they belonged in the 80s. She was different, put together in a way that the rest of the family wasn't. Her clothes were clean. Her hair was always styled, too. She smiled at me like she'd been waiting for me to come over. She asked me if I could help her with the faucet, and said it was stuck. I walked over and turned it, and it moved easily. She gasped and clapped her hands, told me I was so strong and how lucky she was I came over. I felt proud. She made me feel like I was something special. Then she said, "Did you know you have a third eye?" I blinked. What? She smiled wider and said we all have one. Not a physical eye, but a spiritual one. She said it lets you see the truth, whatever that meant. Before I could ask anything, she started walking back toward her house and told me to come with her, so I did. The inside of their house hit me like a wave of rot. It smelled like spoiled food, mildew, and something worse I couldn't place. Trash was everywhere. Garbage bags torn open, rotting food on plates, stained furniture, even dirty diapers were stuffed behind the couch. I tried to leave, but Teresa grabbed my wrist and led me upstairs. Her room was nothing like the rest of the house. It was pristine, with pink wallpaper, clean carpet, shelves full of porcelain dolls, and very ornate old furniture. The air smelled like rose water and old perfume. It was like I stepped into a different building. She gestured for me to sit on a little cushioned stool in the corner, and then walked over to her vanity and opened a drawer. She pulled out a silver tray with a black candle, a crystal, and a thick, leather-bound book. The second I saw the pentagram on the cover, my stomach turned. My parents are Catholic. I knew what that symbol meant. And suddenly, I started seeing it everywhere. On the jewelry box, on the mirror's frame, and peeking out from under the corner of the rug on the floor, etched into the wood. I jumped up. "Sorry, my mom wants me home. Bye." I didn't wait for a response. I ran. In 2019, Agnes had a heart attack and died inside the house. I heard she collapsed in the living room in front of all of the kids. I went to the funeral. It was in this rundown Baptist church on the edge of town. The family was stone-faced, like they didn't know how to react, except for one woman who I'd never seen before. She sat in the second pew, sobbing so loud it echoed. Nobody acknowledged her. That same year, Liam disappeared. The story was that he tried to kill one of the twins and was sent to a psychiatric facility. I never got the full details, but my parents sat my sister and I down that night and said, in no uncertain terms, we were never to go near that family again. I remember their faces, grim and serious. That's when it all clicked. All the little things I hadn't understood. The weird stuff, the fear. Eventually, the rest of the family moved away. They left Violet behind, just an old, frail woman living alone in that collapsing house. She passed away in 2020, alone, in that house. Her estate went up for auction. A few months later, one of my old elementary school teachers, Mrs. S., bought it with her husband. They tore down most of the structure, but kept the original 1920 section, the same part where Teresa's room had been. Mrs. S. invited us over to see the renovations. It was beautiful. Open floor plan, all new appliances, and fresh paint. She showed us upstairs, and that's when my skin started crawling. We were in her room, and I could feel it. Even though the floors were carpeted now, I knew the pentagram was still there, like the floor remembered. I felt nauseous, like something was watching me from the walls. I told Mrs. S. I had a headache and had to go. She was disappointed. I was supposed to stay for dinner. I avoided the house after that, until last year. Mrs. S. asked me to dog sit while they went out of town for a week. I said yes. I figured it was just a job. Easy money. Every night I'd ring the doorbell and they'd buzz me in through the smart lock. Their dogs, a Shih Tzu named Muffin and a snorting little pug named Henry, would greet me tails wagging. The first 4 nights were quiet, peaceful even. I'd feed the dogs, play with them a bit, turn on the porch light, and lock up. But on the last night, I was about to leave when Henry started barking at the staircase. He planted his little legs and just barked over and over. Muffin backed away, whimpering. There was nothing there. And then thump. It came from upstairs. Another thump, louder this time. I didn't stay to investigate. I ran to the front door, slammed it behind me, and locked it. The whole walk home, I couldn't shake the feeling something had followed me. Now it's 2025. We hadn't heard a word about the family in over 4 years. That is, until recently. A girl from school told me she saw Teresa at a farmer's market in a nearby town. Apparently, she started some kind of religious group, calls herself a truth seer. They live in a mobile home community far out in the woods. Flyers have started popping up on bulletin boards and telephone poles. I don't trust it. I don't trust her. I think Teresa is truly evil. I mean, she neglected her kids. She left her mother in that house to rot. And I think she brought something into it. Something dark. Something that stayed behind. I still have nightmares of her and Liam. They stand at the foot of my bed, staring at me, not speaking at all. And every time I pass by that house, even now, I get chills. The good parts, such as the paint, the furniture, it's all surface level. That place remembers, and I don't think it ever let go of what happened there. My name is Keegan. I reside in Michigan with my parents. High school was a decent timeline for me, as I had gotten to meet various new people during my time there. Obviously, I also had some people I tended to hang out with outside of school. The only time I really hung out with them was at places like my local community center, where we would work out and play basketball. Back in freshman year, it was getting close to the end of the year, and I was excited for summer break to be coming. I would be starting driver's training, and even start doing a side job to at least begin making money, so I didn't have the fastest start. I had this one friend named Clayton. I would usually hang out with him at least once a week. He was a grade lower than me, his final year of junior high. We were to some extent good friends, and my dad and I even took him to a Detroit Pistons basketball game at one point. He was quite a big basketball fan, so he was more than eager to attend his first game. Despite all the fun activities in the past, it was until I started becoming more busy that he was somewhat beginning to change. He would usually get a bit sad or angry because I'm not free on a specific day. He was the kind of person to have some pretty intense anger issues when he got pissed off enough. I remember this one day when I told him I wasn't free again, and that I would be home cleaning. It seemed as if he would find the right days where I'm not available to hang out. I didn't check my phone until after I finished cleaning, and I found out that he removed me on Snapchat. I messaged him on Messenger, asking why he got so mad, and why he decided to remove me as a friend. He assumed I was lying to avoid hanging out with him. That thought crossed my mind for a while, and I even followed up with it at times because he was starting to become more obnoxious. On occasion, I would lie and say I'm doing something, going somewhere, or already made plans with another friend. He felt so left out that one day, when the sun had set, he showed up to my apartment I was living in at the time unannounced. I asked him why he didn't text me ahead of time. Nothing. He just stared at me for a few seconds before walking away slowly. Why was he here at this hour? Why didn't he say anything? Why did he just give me this 1,000-yard stare as if I did something to offend him? I hadn't spoken to him the next day. That's also when I turned off my Snap Map on Snapchat to hide my location from him, after he apparently added me back. Some time had gone by, about a month, and he's still the same person, angry or sad when I can't pay him a visit. That's when I got a text from my friend, Nick, who I barely saw in person. He knows Clayton and his ex-girlfriend. Nick had told me some gruesome things about him and what he's done, but my heart dropped as I heard from him and Clayton's ex that he held a knife at his ex-girlfriend's throat and sexually assaulted her. I knew that he was a psycho right then and there. I removed him as a friend on all platforms without any hesitation. He texted me on Instagram before I removed him on there too. He blew up my phone with messages asking why I'm removing him. I just told him I needed some time to myself and I would add him back when I'm better, but I used that as an excuse to get away from him. That night, while I was home alone since my parents went to the next town over for dinner with some old friends of theirs, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I looked out of the peephole and no one was there. I opened the door a crack to survey the hallway, but no one. I figured it was someone ding-dong ditching. I figured they wouldn't come back. But when I randomly looked out my bedroom window, the light was burned out by the sidewalk. I noticed a small flash in the corner of my eye, and I thought it was from inside someone's car, but I felt my stomach drop when I saw a tall figure standing in front of my window. It was him. I opened my window and told him to go away and that I don't want him here. He told me to let him in so he could tell me something. I firmly said no and told him I want him gone, but when he began to move around a bit, I noticed something was in his hand. I couldn't exactly make out what he was holding until he held it up, and when I tell you I was frightened, I felt as if I was going to pass out. Because I shit you not, Clayton was holding a knife in his hand. I told him I was calling the police, but he had already taken off by the time the police had gotten there. I gave the best description of him that I could describe to the cops. I haven't heard a word about or from him since that horrific night. I honestly wouldn't be so surprised if you were trying to kill me while I was home alone. I believe he had murderous intentions. I assumed he probably ended up in juvie after what happened. Not only was I horrified from that experience, but it may have been one of the most traumatic moments of my life. Having your parents gone along with it makes it feel undeniably more unsettling. I'm glad I disconnected all contact from him when I did, because I think if I continued to remain friends with him, I probably could have ended up as one of his endless punching bags, or even worse, dead. This happened in late 2022, when I went on what I thought would be a fun and simple first date with someone I matched with on a dating app. Her name was Emily, and we had been texting for about 2 weeks before deciding to meet up. We both shared a love for horror movies, and when Smile came out, we agreed that seeing it together would be the perfect first date. We picked a weekday night, Thursday. It was a late showing, 10:15 p.m., and at a small, older theater just outside of town. I offered to drive and picked her up around 9:30. She seemed normal, friendly, maybe a little shy. She was quiet for most of the drive, but opened up once we started talking about horror movies we liked growing up. When we got there, the parking lot was almost empty. I joked about how this theater looked like something out of a horror movie itself. Dim lights, flickering neon, and not a single person in the lobby when we walked in. There was only one guy working at the concession counter, and when I asked if it was going to be a full theater, he laughed and said we were the only ones who had bought tickets for that showing. At first, I thought that was great, no crowds, just me, her, and the movie. We went into Theater 6 and chose seats right in the center, about 4 rows from the back. It was freezing in there, which Emily pointed out right away. I offered her my hoodie, and we laughed about how creepy it felt being the only ones in the entire room. We sat back and talked while waiting for the previews to start. I was starting to feel a little chemistry between us, and I figured this would be one of those dates where you actually end up seeing the person again. Then, right before the movie started, like right after the last trailer and just as the lights dimmed lower, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. Someone walked into the theater. They didn't say anything or stop to look around or check their phone for seat numbers like most people do. They walked in slow, straight up the steps and sat directly behind us. I mean, directly. There were maybe 100 open seats, but he chose the one right behind me. Emily turned to look at him too, and she gave me a weird glance like, really? I kind of chuckled and said under my breath, figures. But right away something felt off. You know that feeling when someone's eyes are burning into the back of your head? That's what it felt like. I glanced back after a minute or two. He wasn't watching the screen. He was staring at us. I only saw him for a split second, but he didn't flinch or look away. He didn't even pretend to be interested in the movie. He was just sitting forward a bit, like someone might do if they were really into a scene, but his face wasn't even turned toward the screen. It was angled right at us. At me. I whispered to Emily, "He's just staring." She nodded slowly and whispered back, "I know." We tried to ignore it for a while. The movie started, and I really did try to get into it, but every few minutes, I'd feel it again. The presence behind us. Not just someone being annoying, this was different. There was an intensity to it, like he was waiting for something. After about 20 minutes, I leaned forward in my seat and turned my head a little so I could glance back more casually. Same thing. He was still staring. He was middle-aged, maybe late 40s. He was clean-shaven, kind of pale, wearing a dark gray hoodie. Something about him just looked empty, like he wasn't even there mentally. His eyes didn't look glazed over like someone who was zoning out. From what I saw, he never blinked. I turned back around and whispered to Emily, "This guy is really creeping me out." She looked genuinely scared now. "Do you want to move?" We considered it, but where would we go? It would still be in the same room, and we were already in the best seats. Moving might make it awkward or even provoke him. A few minutes later, I felt something. The guy breathed on me. Not loud or exaggerated. It was soft, but unmistakable. A deep, slow exhale right behind my seat. I spun around, and he was leaning forward over the back of my seat, his face closer than it should have been. I stared at him and said, "Dude, can you not?" He didn't respond. He just slowly leaned back in his seat. That was it. I told Emily, "Let's move." We got up and walked down to the front corner row. It sucked and the angle was bad, but we needed distance. I could barely focus on the movie anymore, just kept glancing back every couple of minutes, and every time I looked back there, he was staring straight at us. He didn't budge. Around halfway through the movie, we heard footsteps. He was coming down the steps. Emily grabbed my arm and we both held still. The footsteps stopped a few rows above us. We didn't turn around. I don't know how long he stood there. I didn't dare look. Then, finally, He walked back up to the top row. I whispered, "We need to leave." She nodded. We grabbed our stuff and slipped out quietly. As we exited the theater and went down the hallway toward the lobby, I glanced back through the glass window in the theater door. He was standing in the aisle now. He wasn't watching the screen. He was just standing there, still staring at us. We went straight to the front and told the concession guy that someone was acting really weird in Theater 6. His smile faded instantly, and he said, "Again?" "What do you mean, again?" I said. And he hesitated, then said, "He's been coming in randomly for like a month. Always late shows and never buys anything. You guys aren't the first ones to complain about him." I responded, "Why hasn't anyone kicked him out?" He looked uncomfortable. He said, "He doesn't technically do anything illegal. Management says unless he touches someone or breaks a rule, we can't really do much." Emily was almost in tears. She asked if someone could walk us to our car. He agreed, and one of the janitors walked us out. The guy didn't follow us that night, at least not that we saw, but the whole ride back, I couldn't shake this fear that he might have written down my license plate, that he might have followed us at a distance, watched us leave, and found out where Emily lived when I dropped her off. For weeks afterward, I was paranoid. My cop friend also told me it was a load of horseshit that they couldn't do anything about him. The theater as a business would reserve every right to kick somebody out. I avoided that side of town for a while. Emily and I talked a few times after that, but never ended up seeing each other again, unfortunately. I think we were both too shaken from what happened. I have not been back to that theater since, though I don't see any reviews on the website about the guy. I wonder just how many people have actually had the same experience. I work at a CVS open 24 hours a day. I've been working at this location for 3 years now, and I'm one of the higher-ups. I agreed to take on the overnight shifts because I believe it helps my chances of getting another promotion, and I like to be on my boss's good side. There would only be one employee working the 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift, as that's all that's really needed. Once the pharmacy opens at 9 a.m., that's when business usually picks up. The 2 employees before me left after I was set up. At my hours, so few customers come in that my job varies from cash register to simply stock working. The beeper at the front door that would go off would alert me when a customer would enter, so I'd know when to go back to the register and wait. A few hours into my shift, I went back to the register to check my phone, which I had charging, and I had a new voicemail from an unknown number. I pulled it up and listened. It was some weird voice on the other end that I couldn't tell belonged to a male or female, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. Like, the sound quality was terrible. The transcription was unavailable for that reason. Obviously, I just ignored it because everyone gets weird calls once in a while. As I continued doing stock work, my phone started to go off. I pulled out my phone and saw a bunch of texts from that number that just called. The first text said, "Call back when you can." The second one said, "I know you're at work, I'm coming to visit." The third one said, "What time are you working till?" I had no idea who this could be. I texted back, "Who the hell is this?" The typing bubble popped up for like 20 seconds, then it went away. They didn't respond to that. Okay, a little unnerving, yes, but I still had to go about my work. Eventually, I heard the ding by the front door, alerting me someone entered, so I went back to the register and waited. I didn't see anyone walking around though, and I waited there for quite a while actually. Eventually, I just decided, okay, that's enough waiting, and went back to stocking shelves. I'd say it was around 2 a.m., a couple hours into my shift. I got a new cart full of items from the back section, this time beauty products, the second aisle in the store. I brought the cart over there and noticed a woman in the corner of the next aisle over, the first aisle. I stepped into that aisle and looked down, asking if she needed any help. She was looking down at one of the products in the corner. She didn't acknowledge me. Didn't know if she heard me or not, but I just felt awkward, so I left her alone. I walked back to the register just to wait there for her to finish up, and then I started getting more texts from that number. I was basically getting spammed with random messages that made no sense, except one that said, "I'm here." So I said screw it and I called the number. I heard a ringing sound coming from inside the store, and my heart started beating twice as fast. I felt a heavy feeling in my throat. I canceled the call, and the ringing stopped. I brought myself to walk over to that last aisle again, where the ringing was coming from. That woman was still there in that corner. I yelled, "Joke's over, I'm calling the cops, whoever you are." I almost knew it had to be some girl I knew playing a prank on me. I went back around the counter because for some reason I felt safer there. I really didn't want to call the police though. Instead, I called my best friend, who picked up on the first try. I asked him to think of anyone we knew with brunette hair who had my number and would be playing a prank on me like this. He guessed a few names, but based on the body shape of that woman, it was none of them. My friend told me to just stop being a pussy since it was a girl. I told him, "Alright, whatever," and hung up the phone. I was about to suck it up and walk over there when I noticed her, peering half of her head from around the corner of the beauty aisle. She had to be kneeling down too because the shelf in that aisle is lower than the rest. The first thing I noticed was blood trickling down her cheeks. She was smiling and I heard her making these fucked up laughing sounds. It looked like she cut the skin on her cheeks right next to her lips, and this was when I realized she wasn't our age. She looked like she was anywhere from 30 to 40. I took one step closer and I recognized her. It was this lady with serious mental issues who had DM'd me with a fake account before, and as far as I knew, she was dangerous and was supposed to be in some psychiatric center. She must have gotten my number through my Instagram, which I have set as a public figure profile, which includes my phone number. Seeing half her bloodied face peering at me, smiling, made me want to yak. I yelled at her to get away or I'd stab her. Of course, a complete bluff. I ran to one of the back aisles and hid from her, and I only sighed a breath of relief when I heard the beep of the front door go off. I went to go check if she was still there, but she wasn't. And so I called 911 and had the police take a report, showed them the CCTV footage, and warned them of her name and that she had serious mental issues. The officers were very nice and told me they'd be in the immediate area in case she returned. I blocked the number she was texting me from, and I like to think the police contacted her family. I used to work the dairy aisle in a grocery store. It was the worst job I ever had. A lot of heavy lifting, expired dairy products, and shivering. The big dairy cooler was in the back of the store in the area where all the groceries yet to be stocked on the shelves were kept. I would often just chill in the dairy cooler, no pun intended, because the supervisors on duty would never think to check on me in there. I'd bring a hoodie just so I wouldn't get cold. Anyway, one night I was working till 10 p.m. The store got quiet past 9. However, Mr. Senko, the supervisor who was a pain in the ass, was on duty. So after stocking the milk cartons one more time for the night, I brought everything to the back area again. On my way back to the dairy cooler to just hide and chill in there, I saw very briefly, for like half a second, the face of someone through the glass of the cooler door. But they either just ducked down or faded away out of my view. Who was in there? I went through the doors to see, and got hit with that blast of cold air and the loud sound of the giant refrigerator blowing cold air into the room. Boxes, pallets, and crates of milk everywhere, but no immediate sight of anyone. There were many places to hide behind the giant piles of boxes, but no one was in there. So I did my usual. I sat on an empty milk crate hidden behind a big pile of boxes. Then suddenly the lights in the cooler turned off, and it went almost pitch dark, besides the light from outside the cooler coming in through the glass of the door. I had a mini freakout because I thought Mr. Senko knew I was in here and was basically signaling for me to come out. I stood up and came out from around the boxes, and then I froze. Something was blocking partial view of the two cooler doors. There was a silhouette of a really tall person right in front of me. It couldn't be Mr. Senko, he was kind of short, and the figure right in front of me had to be a foot taller than me. Suddenly, the light flickered back on, and the figure I thought I saw right in front of me was no longer there. I nervously walked around where I thought I saw something standing. I even waved my hand through the air in that spot. I somehow felt like I wasn't alone in there, and so I burst through the doors and shut the dairy cooler light. I peeked inside now with the light off, but that figure I saw in there just a moment ago was still gone. I threw my apron off and clocked out early. I didn't care if Mr. Senko would be mad. I just needed to get out of there. That was the one paranormal thing to ever happen in my life. I do overnight stock shifts for various local Lowe's home improvement stores. All I do is work whichever specific location needs me for the night, usually dependent on which location is having the most business. My job is to unload trucks, operate forklifts in the back section and throughout the store, and do night stock work. The trucker on duty that night was Paul, the only other guy with me that night. Once we successfully unloaded the truck, he helped me sort them in the back room before going off to do another pickup with the truck. So I was left alone to continue work as normal, nothing I wasn't used to. I'd scan the new shipments to take inventory, then I'd bring the items out to the floor and stock shelves with the new items. That's exactly what I was doing, going back and forth from the back warehouse section to the main floor, stocking shelves, sometimes using the forklift. I was scanning items with the inventory gun towards the back section of the warehouse when a loud crash scared the living shit out of me, to the point that I jumped and turned around mid-air. It was a big box that had fallen off a large pile of pallets full of unopened packages. The box's contents didn't spill out, the box was still intact, so I went to get the forklift to lift the packages back up onto the pallet. It was at this point I smelt a funky odor, but it wasn't the most uncommon thing ever in the warehouse, so I continued my work. At some point later that night, I turned the corner into the paint aisle and saw someone walking all the way down at the other side. They were dressed in dark clothes. No one else was supposed to be in the store, and they weren't wearing work clothes. So I shouted, "Hey." They turned around, and when they saw me, they took off running down an intersecting aisle. Naturally, I yelled again and started chasing after him. Of course, when I got to the intersecting aisle, he was nowhere to be seen. He could have been in any aisle by then. Still, I did one quick jog down the middle aisle to look through all the intersecting aisles, but I didn't see anyone. I called anyone who I thought could have possibly been on duty, but nobody even picked up. I was at a loss for who that could be. I had to assume it was an intruder. I returned to the warehouse, and as I walked through the doors, I heard another crash from the back section of the warehouse. I ran in that direction and discovered something had fallen from the same pile of pallets and boxes. That was it. I had to run and grab a ladder to go climb up the stack of boxes. When I got to the top, I realized there was a perimeter, or wall rather, of packages and boxes surrounding one big hole. In this hole, there was a homeless-looking man dressed in all black, the same man I had just seen. This was where the odor from earlier was coming from. He looked at me, and I looked back at him, speechless. I didn't know what to say. He got up and seemed as though he were coming to lunge at me. I quickly stepped down the ladder low enough to where I could jump off. Then I ran down the aisle of the warehouse and stopped. I got on the phone with the police, and a couple officers showed up 15 minutes later. Of course, the little secret home that man had made between boxes was empty now. He evacuated with all this stuff. Camera footage later revealed that man had been staying in that little secret spot he created for a whole week. No one really checks the camera footage unless there's a reason to. That's how he got away with it unnoticed for so long. I'm a single mother of two. My ex-husband and I take turns watching the kids month to month. My son Luke is 15 and my daughter Melissa is 10. This happened just a few months ago. I did some late night grocery shopping after work. Luke had texted me earlier that he was going out with his friends. It was a Friday night. I wasn't thrilled with him leaving Melissa alone, but 10 is the age a lot of parents are more comfortable leaving their kids alone, and he knows I can't expect him to babysit her anymore. I got back to the house around 9 o'clock at night. I had to make 3 or 4 trips from the car to the house because of the amount of groceries I bought. I always overdo it with the groceries on the months I get to watch the kids. And then on the months alone, I'm the complete opposite. When I finally finished putting all the groceries in the fridge and pantry, I went upstairs to greet Melissa. I heard the shower running in the bathroom, so I went back downstairs to lay down in the living room and put on my show on Netflix. I was halfway through an episode, and I still hadn't heard Melissa leave the bathroom upstairs. Long hot showers aren't free, and I never condone my kids wasting water. I went up there to knock on the door and tell her to get out of the shower soon. I went back downstairs to resume my show. Only for about 5 minutes though. Melissa was still in the shower, so I went back up there again and knocked louder. This time I waited for her to acknowledge me, but when she didn't, I continued to knock louder and yell her name angrily. It took me a little bit to notice through the bottom crack of the door that the light was off in the bathroom. I tried the doorknob, but the door was locked. The locks on my doors inside the house are easily unlocked with a fingernail though, so I had to force my way in, now growing concerned. As the door opened, I yelled into the room at my daughter, at that moment feeling more furious than anything. I flicked the light switch up and went over to the tub. I yanked the curtain half open, honestly not knowing what to expect, but not in my worst nightmare would I have expected to find some 50-something-year-old withered-looking woman laying flat in the bathtub with the shower spraying water onto her. I screamed so loud and long until I lost the ability to scream for a few seconds. I had my back pressed up to the mirror. Everything on the counter had fallen to the ground. I felt an unexplainable sense of shock and horror. The woman stood up in the tub, looking at me, her hair and clothes obviously drenched. I slammed the bathroom door shut and screamed Melissa's name. I checked her room first thing, and I found her hiding under the covers. I grabbed her and tugged her out of the room. As we passed the bathroom door towards the stairs, that woman was standing in the doorway of the bathroom. Everything about her looked like a zombie. Her eyes, her movement. I made sure to grab my cell phone before locking the two of us in the spare room in the basement. I called the police, and as I waited for the police to come, Melissa told me she thought it was me who came into the house, but when she saw some random, scary-looking woman walking up the stairs, she ran to her room to hide. Luke left the front door unlocked when he left. The police showed up in a timely manner. I talked to the police and told them exactly what Melissa told me. I described the woman's appearance, noting she was also soaked, and because of that I couldn't give a good description of her hair besides long and graying. This was all after making sure the woman was no longer in the house. Not under a bed, not in a closet, not behind a shower curtain. She simply left the house as easily as she entered. It's likely she was drugged out of her mind. I'd never seen someone who looked like they were literally lacking consciousness yet still walking. I don't even know if I would have been able to press any charges on her if she was found, which she wasn't. And don't you worry, I properly scolded and reprimanded Luke. Always remember to lock your doors. This was over 15 years ago. We once went to this family resort in New York State. We took our two kids who were 4 and 6 at the time. This focuses on our 6-year-old Michael Jr. We were on vacation around Easter time, so the resort had a bunch of fun little festivities set up for the kids, like Easter egg hunts, Easter decorations during bingo, and someone walking around in a big Easter bunny costume. While we were in the dining hall one evening, the Easter bunny was walking around giving kids high fives. When he came over to our table, our 4-year-old Peter hid under the table crying, but Michael Jr. gave him the high five and wasn't afraid at all. The guy in the bunny suit walked away quickly, probably to get our son to stop crying. The next day there was an Easter egg hunt, which was in one of the fields by the kids center of the resort. I watched the kids scrambling to collect eggs while my husband Mike was elsewhere. I'm not really sure what he was doing. The Easter bunny guy was walking around the field interacting with the kids. I noticed he knew to avoid Peter. Peter came running to me when the Easter bunny got near to him. He would do the same thing with Santa around the holidays. The guy in the bunny suit was interacting with Michael a lot. I found it kind of cute. I just didn't want Peter around him so that he wouldn't start crying again, so I brought him to the other side of the play area for a little while. When it looked like the Easter bunny was gone, I walked him back to where Michael Jr. was last, but I couldn't see him. I started calling his name. Then another parent came up to me and asked if I was looking for a boy wearing a red sweater. I said yes, and she told me the guy in the Easter bunny costume walked him out of the field area in the direction of the parking lots. She told me this in a slightly concerned-sounding tone. I picked up Peter and ran in the direction that the woman pointed. I ran faster than I ever could, while holding my son on top of it. Motherly instincts clearly kicking in, giving me an adrenaline boost. I saw the man in the Easter bunny costume holding my child's hand, approaching a black car. I screamed at the top of my lungs at him to get away from my son. Then I screamed Michael's name. They both turned to look at us, and the man let go of my son's hand. Michael ran over to me, not realizing at all the danger he was just in. The man in the costume said to me that he was trying to find his mom since he looked lost. But that was total BS. He was about to get in his car with my 6-year-old son. I tried to yank the mask off of him, but he shoved me and yelled at me to piss off. Then he got in his car and drove away. I tried to remember his plate number, but he was gone too quickly. I called my husband on my old archaic cell phone, and I brought my kids to the front desk of the resort to meet him there. They said the man in the Easter Bunny costume didn't work there. I was livid, yelling at the front desk workers the whole time, who were apparently aware of the man, yet didn't stop him or question him. We threatened to sue the entire place. They ended up refunding us for our entire stay, which we gladly accepted. But I was mere seconds away from losing my kid forever. We adopted our son Charlie at the age of 2. He's aware that he was adopted. We were honest with him about that ever since he started to learn to speak. He's now 7 years old. We don't have any children of our own because my wife can't have kids. Somewhat recently, my wife and I started noticing very strange behavior with Charlie. And what motivated me to actually sit down and write this was something my wife and I still can't explain. There's an upstairs toy room for Charlie since there's 2 extra bedrooms in our house. He has a big toy closet in there, and the whole room has a bunch of toys like a Lego table, action figures, and such. For the duration of about a month, at different times we'd hear Charlie talking to himself. Not like role-playing talking in his play, we'd overhear him speaking as if he were talking to another person in the room. The first time this happened, my wife wasn't home, but as I passed his playroom, I overheard him talking as if he had a friend in there, and I swear to God I actually walked in just to make sure he didn't actually have a friend in there. When I walked in, I saw him sitting at his Lego table with a couple of his WWE action figures on top of it. But he wasn't currently playing with any of them. He was just sitting there blankly staring at me. I asked, "Who are you talking to?" He shrugged his shoulders. As weird as it was, I had to assume he was just playing. The next time something strange happened, it was a lot worse. This time my wife was at least home to witness it with me. We were in the kitchen, Charlie was in the backyard playing. We heard him laughing and talking suddenly, so my wife went to look out the window to see what he was doing. Then she called me over to look as well. What we saw was Charlie talking to thin air, as if he were talking to a person. It resembled him trying to show someone who wasn't there how to use the plastic sword in his hand. I expressed to my wife my concern. She said he may just have an imaginary friend. I told her I didn't know how I felt about that. She seemed to feel it was completely normal. Fast forward to like the 3rd or 4th instance. It was 9 o'clock on a school night, approaching Charlie's bedtime. He was in his playroom still. I was trying to be lenient with the bedtime and let him play for a few more minutes. I heard Charlie laughing and talking to his imaginary friend again. I curiously had to take a peek into the room. As I opened Charlie's door, I heard his closet door shut. I looked at Charlie, standing up in the dead center of the room, with his toys scattered around him. I asked him who's in the closet, and something on the inside of it fell. It sounded like a big plastic toy. I asked one more time who's in the closet in a yell. He said George. I swung the door open, expecting one of his little friends in there. Maybe my wife let him have a playdate or sleepover without telling me. But the closet was empty besides his toys. I picked Charlie up against his will and brought him to his room. I told him he was going to bed. Then I told my wife about the closet door closing on its own, and then the toy inside falling on its own. She thought I was messing with her at first, but then she saw I was serious. That night, I woke up to sounds from down the hall in Charlie's playroom. We sleep with the door open. I woke my wife and told her to follow me quietly. We tiptoed to the toy room. Charlie wasn't in there, but a distinct, loud clicking sound was coming from inside the toy closet. I opened it, showing bravery for my wife, and as I did, the clicking stopped. We dug for any kind of electric toys that may have made that clicking sound. Nothing, though. I think that was the night I became a believer in the paranormal. The next morning, I woke to my wife's scream. She was holding our wedding photo. It was cracked right down the middle, not just the picture in the glass, but the frame too. It was cracked perfectly down the middle, separating the two of us. We took Charlie and stayed with my mom for a week. Then, after a week, my wife and I returned to the house. We listed the house for sale, and after a few days of normalcy, we brought Charlie back to the house. But we moved out a month later. This is gonna sound weird, but bear with me. When I was in high school, there was a kid who told everyone he was a demon. I don't feel comfortable even writing his name for reasons you'll soon understand. I'm just gonna call him Patrick, even though his name sounds like something out of a Shakespeare play. He was extremely socially awkward and walked around with a super empty stare that made even teachers uncomfortable. He wore the same blank gray hoodie literally every single day. I'm not exaggerating. I'm pretty sure he never washed the thing since he always smelled terrible too. He was decently short and pretty average looking, although you wouldn't be able to tell since he always had his hood up. He never took his sunglasses off, even inside. Teachers eventually stopped asking him to because he would never listen anyway. Now comes the weird stuff. He didn't have any friends, but had this weird tendency to adopt people. What I mean by that is, if he liked you, which he could decide randomly one day, he would walk up to you and say, "You're adopted," meaning you were part of his circle or whatever. Apparently this would make you safe from him or something. That's at least what he'd say about it. He didn't really like that many people though, so few people were ever really adopted. I was one of those few. Looking back, it was probably because he had a crush on me. None of us believed his demon spiel, and everyone just assumed he was a troubled kid, which he definitely was. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that this all takes place in Wayne, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. Another girl I used to be friends with, Gabby, had also been adopted by him. Patrick's crush on her was a little more obvious, and all my friends knew it. One day, my friends and I were chilling on the dugouts behind our high school, killing time and doing God knows what. It was me, Gabby, Laura, and Luke. I can't exactly remember how it happened, but the topic of conversation floated over to Patrick's crush on Gabby. We were all laughing about it, and Gabby was pretty obviously embarrassed. I can't remember what it was, but there was a nickname we'd substitute for Patrick's name, because his real name was too clunky. This time though, I distinctly remember Laura using Patrick's real name. The third time she said it, I swear in my life that Patrick appeared out of nowhere and jumped on top of the dugout with a baseball bat in his hand. It wasn't scary in a typical sense, but it was one of the most unsettling things I'd ever seen up until that point. We quickly stopped talking, nervous that he might have overheard us talking about him. He didn't say anything though, and just stared at us. I gave him a little wave, and he nodded in acknowledgement at me before jumping back down to the ground and swiftly walking away. After we were sure he was gone, the four of us burst into laughter, finding humor in how weird the whole encounter was. On the inside though, I was still a little disturbed. The next incident I can remember was significantly more creepy and impossible to laugh about. I was literally in Laura's house, and the two of us were hanging out in her room. Her parents were home. I'm not sure what exactly we were talking about, but again, Patrick's name was said 3 times between the two of us. Not 10 minutes later, we heard Laura's front door slam shut. Confused, we went downstairs to see if one of our other friends had decided to pull up. Laura was friends with everyone and her parents were super chill, so people came and went unannounced when it came to her house. Laura's mom had beaten us to the door though. We turned the corner of the living room and stared in shock at Patrick, who was just standing there, talking to Laura's mom. She asked him what he was doing there, to which he literally replied, "I was summoned." Laura's mom made some small talk with him before politely asking him to leave, which he silently did. The reason why more alarm bells weren't going off was because Laura's mom actually knew Patrick and pitied him. Laura and I weren't as calm about the situation though. As we walked back up the stairs, we talked to each other with horrified faces about how creepy that was. A few minutes later, we made the connection between the two events. He seemed to pop up when his name was uttered 3 times. I know how ridiculous this sounds, but we had both witnessed 2 unexplainable events and knew Patrick's history of claiming to be a demon. How else could someone else rationalize what had taken place? We told all of our friends about the incident the next day, and our friend group swore to never say his name 3 times in one conversation again. Things were going well for a few months, and I started to think that maybe I had overreacted. That is, until one day, when my same group of friends were hanging out at my other friend Johnny's house. We were chilling on his back deck when the topic of conversation again found itself concerning Patrick. Despite all of our efforts to convince him, Johnny refused to believe what we told him about Patrick. Even after confirming the story with the entire group, he was still skeptical. To display his disbelief, he jokingly used Patrick's name 3 times in the same sentence, to our dismay. When nothing happened, he grinned and told us we were stupid to believe something so ridiculous. As annoyed as I was, part of me was relieved that he hadn't shown up. I spoke too soon though, because a few minutes later, Patrick jumped over Johnny's backyard fence. Johnny noticed him first and stopped speaking mid-sentence. The rest of us followed suit and went dead silent, nervous about what Patrick might do this time. We watched as he stared at us for a few seconds before jumping back over the fence and disappearing out of sight. Johnny started freaking out and accused us of conspiring with Patrick to scare him. We told him that we literally begged him not to say anything. We sat in silence for a while before Johnny eventually told us all to go home, clearly shaken from the experience. The last experience I had concerning Patrick was definitely the scariest and most disturbing. It was the only one where I felt like my life might have actually been in danger. A few months after the incident at Johnny's house, I was home alone one night. My parents rarely left the house back then, so this was a rare occurrence. I decided to take advantage of the situation and invited a boy over whom I'd been talking to. He was kind of a tool, but so were most of the guys I was talking to at that age. We were hanging out in my room, and it was lightly raining outside. After a while, he mentioned something about Patrick, which made me visibly cringe. He got confused, so I explained the situation to him. He burst out laughing and told me he was going to say Patrick's name to scare me. I begged him not to, but he did it anyway. Only this time, he didn't just say it. He literally screamed Patrick's name 3 times at the top of his lungs. There was no delay this time. The moment he finished yelling, I could hear the rain instantly pick up outside. A few seconds later, there was a flash of lightning. I started to freak out. The guy I was with actually seemed sorry and told me it was probably just an extremely unlikely coincidence. I cursed him out and ran to my window to look at the storm. I glanced down to look at my driveway and screamed when I saw a silhouette of a person looking up at my window. It was too dark and stormy to know for sure, but I was 99% certain that it was Patrick. I shut the blinds and rushed downstairs to make sure all the doors were locked. After locking the back door, I saw that person again. Only this time, he was standing motionlessly in my front yard. I felt a panic attack coming on, and I knew Patrick was going to find a way inside my house. I started screaming, "But I'm adopted," over and over again, hoping that would do something. I know there was no way he'd have been able to hear me, but my brain was all over the place at that point. The guy I was with ran down the stairs a few seconds later and picked me up off the kitchen floor in an attempt to comfort me. I looked out the window again, and he was gone. The storm was still coming down like crazy though, but it's not like I was going to search the property anyway. The next morning, after that guy had left, I went out to inspect my yard. To my horror, I found something sinister in the far corner of my backyard. It was Patrick's hoodie, and wrapped inside of it were a couple random belongings of mine that I assumed I lost. My parents were gone another day, and I was too scared to call the police. I figured I'd show my parents what I had found after school the next day, and they'd take it from there. I never had to, though. The next day, Patrick didn't show up to school. He didn't show up the day after that either. None of us ever saw him again, and no one knew what happened to him. My parents still live in the same house, which is something I think about a lot. I know this isn't your typical scary story, but I'm not sure where else to vent about this. A few people from school told me they caught Patrick hiding and eavesdropping on their conversations, which could explain how he was able to show up out of nowhere. As I've grown older and thought back on the whole thing, I think what makes the most sense is Patrick was just a mentally ill stalker who followed me and possibly other girls around, hence why he was always able to appear when his name was brought up. It skeeves me out just imagining him following me around all over the place, listening to me. I don't even want to wonder where he is today. I'm from Denver. This happened a few years ago. My friend Mike and I were heading to a dinner party one snowy Saturday evening. We decided to stop at a liquor store before heading to the party. It was honestly a pretty annoying detour with the snow coming down, but we didn't want to show up completely empty-handed. We picked out some local craft beers and a bottle of whiskey and made our way back to the car. I remember the snow started to pick up around then, but it was nothing we weren't used to. He ran back into the liquor store to grab a pack of Zins, his latest nicotine fixation. I remember being annoyed about that because I was the one driving and didn't have the best car for the snow at the time. After a few minutes, he emerged from the liquor store and hopped in the car. I immediately pulled out of the parking lot and we were back on our way. The snow was falling even heavier now, covering the roads in a thick blanket of white. The drive to the party was supposed to be straightforward, about 20 to 30 minutes through familiar suburban neighborhoods. Things in my life are never as easy as they seem though. The snowstorm had other plans, turning what was supposed to be a relaxing route into a treacherous journey. Let me just say, I'm not a great driver as is, and the car slipping every 10 seconds didn't help matters. After a tense few minutes driving uphill, I turned a corner and was met with a sight no one ever wants to see. In the middle of the street was a stopped car. Its hazards were flashing ominously, cutting through the falling snow like distress signals. Both the driver's and passenger side doors were open. I was tempted to just drive around it and continue on my merry way, but Mike instructed me to stop. Judge me if you want, but I'm not your typical Good Samaritan. I've been through way too much BS in my life that has ultimately resulted in a distrust in strangers I typically default to. I told him we were late, but he urged me to stop with a concerned voice. Mike had gotten me into trouble before with his childlike curiosity, but this was different. Someone could be in trouble. Reluctantly, I stopped the car, and the two of us sat in emotionless silence for a few seconds. Mike asked if we should check it out, which I told him was what we were doing. He rolled his eyes and told me watching the car from through the windshield wasn't going to accomplish anything. He was kind of right. I really didn't want to get out of the car though. Nervous about the situation, I asked him if he'd just wait a few more minutes, which he reluctantly agreed to. We sat there watching the eerie blinking of the hazards against what was otherwise a beautiful snowy backdrop. Nothing happened, which I was kind of surprised by. Eventually, Mike said he had had enough and was going to investigate. Before I could stop him, he stepped out of the car. I watched with a rising sense of apprehension as he approached the vehicle. As he was doing so, I could have sworn I saw something dark move out of the corner of my eye. It might have been my worried mind playing tricks on me, but this situation was seeming worse and worse to me every second that passed. Not even 10 seconds later, I thought I saw the car jolt a little, like something had moved in the trunk or back seat. Again, maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, but I didn't care. I made a quick-time decision and slammed on the horn, startling Mike, who had been inspecting the inside of the vehicle. He understood what I was communicating and sprinted back to the car. I drove off immediately and told him my suspicion that the whole thing was a trap. He was pretty annoyed when I told him I didn't have any actual proof, but I responded in a firm voice that I wasn't going to risk my life for someone who could easily call for help. The rest of the drive was pretty tense, to be completely honest. He was the type of guy to hold a grudge longer than most. We arrived at the dinner party and things were finally normal again. We were there for several hours, and Mike and I had all but forgotten what happened earlier. After a nice dinner and an enjoyable time catching up with old friends, our host turned on the TV to give some departing guests an update on the snowstorm. He flicked over to the local news, and what I saw was actually horrifying. The police were issuing reports of a stolen vehicle that had been jacked not even 2 hours earlier. They were circulating a spoken account from the victim, which went something like this. A woman was driving her teenage son home from a friend's house when she noticed a car in the middle of the road, hazards on and doors open. The two approached the car to see if someone was in distress, and as they did, two men sprung out from behind a snowbank and another emerged from the trunk of the vehicle. They held the woman at gunpoint and forced her to turn over her keys. They promptly sped off with the stolen car, along with the one that had been used in the trap. I stared at Mike with a look of pure fear. That could have been us. The two of us told the rest of the party what happened earlier, and that quickly put a damper on the general atmosphere, but people were eating the story up. The worst thing about this experience is that I'm even more distrusting of strangers than I previously was. I often think about how many people I would have otherwise helped out in a time of need had I not experienced such a meticulous trap. The series of events I'm about to recount happened over 30 years ago, during my early childhood. Forgive me if some details are shaky, but I'll try to remember as much as possible. I was around 10 years old. My extended family was massive. At that age, it was hard for me to remember the faces of all my relatives, let alone their names. At every family gathering, I was introduced to someone whose face I didn't recognize, even though they all seemed to recognize me. My dad was one of 9 children, so I had 8 sets of aunts and uncles on his side alone. My grandparents on my dad's side were extremely well off and had a massive beachfront property, which was communal along my dad and his siblings. I don't know its exact dimensions, but I'm pretty sure I could sleep over 30 people. Because of this, my family would often spend entire chunks of the summer down there. Both my parents had jobs that allowed them to either work remotely or spend a lot of time away from their offices. My dad's siblings and their kids would do the same. There was rarely a time when it was just our family at the beach house. I got along with all my cousins and preferred spending time at the beach house rather than at home since I was closer with some of my cousins than any of my hometown friends. I liked a lot of my aunts and uncles too. My favorite by far was Uncle Joseph, who was the father of my cousin Brandon. Brandon was honestly kind of antisocial and we didn't really play that much together. Uncle Joseph was awesome though, and he'd never fail to brighten my mood or make me laugh. In addition to being great with kids, he was a licensed therapist and psychiatrist, and was often who I'd turn to in times of need. There's a decent chance he knew more about me than my parents did. I confided in him regularly, and there was nothing I was uncomfortable divulging. Anyway, that summer, I began having tremendously graphic and disturbing nightmares. As far as I can recall, there weren't any common themes between them. They'd all just be about something psychologically taxing, like a family member dying or being alone forever, or something along those lines. I wish I could provide more details, but I've long since purged my mind of those horrors. I do remember one dream distinctly though. It was one of those false awakening dreams. I woke up and went downstairs to meet my parents for breakfast, like I do on a typical morning. When I got downstairs though, they weren't in the kitchen, and there was no food on the dining room table. I ran back upstairs and barged into my parents' and then siblings' rooms, but no one was there. The rest of the dream was basically me crying on my bedroom floor, wondering why everyone had abandoned me. After 3 or 4 of those nightmares in a row, I decided to tell my Uncle Joseph out of embarrassment of telling my parents. He listened with a concerned look on his face as I described the kinds of things I was experiencing, and he even started writing things down in his little notebook. He instructed me to do some meaningful internal self-reflection as something was clawing at my subconscious. What kind of self-reflection was I supposed to do though? I was 10 years old. He told me he'd mull things over and that I should come back to him if the problem persisted. Of course, it did. A few days and nightmares later, I gave Uncle Joseph an update. He told me he'd been thinking about the situation and that he had figured out what was going on in my brain. He said that even though I didn't think it, I was deeply frustrated with my parents and was harboring some unresolved resentment towards them. I was more confused than I've ever been. I was nothing if not a well-behaved, polite, grateful kid. I had always listened to my parents and loved them more than anything. Uncle Joseph knew what he was talking about though. He was a therapist after all. I assumed he had dealt with similar situations in the past and considered myself lucky that he was helping me. I asked him how I should proceed with everything, and told him this newfound knowledge kind of scared me. He told me it was perfectly normal that I was scared, and that most of his adult patients react in the same way. He then told me it was also normal that I disagreed with what he was saying, since dreaming implies a subconscious feeling that the brain refuses to accept. That did kind of make sense to me. He told me that in the next few days, I should be slightly more disobedient when it came to my parents. He told me to try saying no more often, and to argue with them when I didn't get my way. So that's what I did. For 3 days after talking to him, I behaved so uncharacteristically that my parents got concerned. They told me they didn't like my recent behavior, and I'd better quit it. It killed me to do that to them, but I couldn't stand having nightmares literally every night. My 10-year-old self would have done anything to put an end to those night terrors. They didn't stop though. In fact, they actually got worse. More graphic, more disturbing, and more vivid. It was too much. I confided in Uncle Joseph again, and he told me there was one more thing we could try. I begged him to tell me what it was, but he seemed hesitant. After a few minutes of pleading, he revealed what the thing was. He said my brain was too mature for my young body and that I needed to set it free. Obviously, I had no idea what he meant by that. He told me if I had one more nightmare, he'd tell me what I had to do. I went to sleep, terrified that night. I didn't want to set my body free, even if I didn't know what he was talking about. That night, I actually woke up before having a nightmare. In the several days that this had been going on, I had never woken up before having a nightmare. This was new. For some reason though, I was scared to move or even breathe loudly. It wasn't sleep paralysis, but I was scared out of my mind. I stared at the wall in that same position for a full minute, not quite sure what I was doing. The next thing I heard was something I will never forget, no matter how hard I try. Whispering, right next to my ear. Uncle Joseph's whispering. I was sure of it. I turned over and screamed, which sent him flying back. He quickly left the room and shut the door. I sat there in a cold sweat. Part of me thought I was still having a nightmare. Instead of going back to sleep, I ran to my parents' room and told them everything. I told them about the nightmares, about Uncle Joseph, about everything. My dad didn't waste a second. He stormed into Uncle Joseph's room and confronted him. My uncle obviously denied everything, but my dad was a big dude and could easily push him around. A fight broke out between them, and my dad snatched the satchel Uncle Joe carried everywhere. Uncle Joseph promptly gathered up his things and basically ran to his car. My dad started going through the satchel, but what he found was sickening. There were pages and pages of dream-related things, both handwritten notes and printed articles. Articles about inducing dreams, specifically nightmares. Personal notes about different techniques, previous data, and types of experiments. It was horrific. Uncle Joseph was eventually arrested, as the police found some even more suggestive things on his computer. I'm not going to go into full detail, but I'm sure you could piece together what they found based on Uncle Joseph wanting to set my body free. I never saw him again. I don't know what happened to him long term, since my parents never liked talking about the situation, at least around me. Sometimes I kick myself for being so naive about the whole thing, but there's nothing I can do about that now. I'm 28 years old now, but I vividly remember a horrifying incident that occurred when I was a 22-year-old college student. I lived in Florida, in a fairly large house in Orlando, with a rather large property with a big pool outside. I was living with my parents at the time, and they both owned their respective businesses and frequently traveled for meetings and conventions and whatnot. One week in mid-May, when both of my parents were away, I asked their permission, and they allowed me to invite a limited amount of friends over to have a pool party in the backyard. I was excited and quite surprised that my parents trusted that I would be responsible enough to have a small party, promising no alcohol, no loud music, and to send everyone home at a reasonable hour, as to not disturb the neighbors. I proceeded to call 6 of my best friends and let them know about the pool party, inviting them over the following evening with a limit of 1 guest per person. Everyone replied almost instantly, totally down to come over, asking if they should bring over snacks and drinks. Remembering what my parents said, I ignored their conditions and allowed my friends to bring alcohol. The following night at around 8 p.m., almost all of my friends who I invited showed up with their bathing suits and plenty of alcohol. My friends took turns playing music on my Bluetooth speaker. They all brought their girlfriends or guy friends that were all acquaintances of mine, totaling 13 people including me. I started the backyard fire pit, and we started drinking, laughing, making idle chit-chat, and some of my friends decided to go into the pool. Most of my friends jumped in off the diving board, and I sat by the fire watching them splash, pick their girlfriends up, slam them in the pool, and have a good time in their now drunken state. Almost 2 hours passed, and I remember what my parents said about allowing guests to stay late. It was now approximately 10:30 p.m., and most of my friends were still in the pool listening to music, and occasionally coming out for snacks and more booze. Myself in a rather drunken state, I kind of lost track of time. I went inside of my house for a few moments to grab another beer, when I heard leaves rustling from the bushes on the side of my property. Now keep in mind, my house is gated and has security cameras all around, so I didn't get too suspicious, and I didn't think much of the sounds, figuring some of my friends may have made their way to the front of the house to either make out with their girlfriends or get ready to go home. At that point, it was already 11:30 p.m., and I completely failed to adhere to all my parents' rules, which actually made me feel a little guilty. I went back outside with snacks and drinks and told everyone that it was almost time to end our evening. 10 out of the 12 of my guests were still in the pool screaming and horsing around, while the 2 others went missing. When I realized this, I went back inside, walked around the house, and heard laughing and moaning from upstairs in one of the guest bedrooms. Assuming that one of my friends snuck upstairs with his girlfriend to hook up and whatnot, I don't need to give an explanation. I was too drunk and lazy at the time to go upstairs and tell them it's time to leave. But before I returned to the backyard to finally close up shop, I heard blood-curdling screams come from the pool. I ran outside to find my pool filled with blood on the surface, with my friends screaming that one of their girlfriends was swimming, and felt an arm tug them down and must have had a knife cut them on their leg. All of a sudden, an unfamiliar face, a guy probably in his late 20s, with long scraggly hair, a scruffy beard, tall with a couple tattoos on his body, emerged from the pool and ran out in a pair of fatigue cargo shorts and bolted to the front of the house. A few of the guys tried to chase after him, but they couldn't find where he went. We all panicked and took my friend's girlfriend and went inside the house, with a couple from upstairs hustling downstairs to see what the commotion was. I locked the doors while calling 911 requesting an ambulance. When the police and paramedics came to my house, they took the injured girl into the ambulance, and the rest of my friends left the house, confused and shaken up by the events that just took place. The police and I went to review the security footage, and lo and behold, when I heard that rustling in my bushes, there was the guy, who somehow made it over my gate undetected, went to the side of the house and casually blended in, and went into the pool with the rest of the guests. Stupid me didn't think of checking the surveillance system. Too drunk and concerned about my friends having a good time, that I irresponsibly let an intruder enter my parents' property undetected. I gave the footage to the police, but to this day, they were never alike to identify the intruder. And of course, when my parents returned, they found out what transpired, scolded me, and never allowed me to have a party in the house again. I was once invited to a pool party when I was 17. One of the more popular kids in our school was throwing a high school graduation pool party one weekend where his parents wouldn't be home. The kid's name was Daryl, and he had a huge backyard with a nice in-ground pool perfect for pool parties, though most of us have big yards where we live because we're in a less congested town. I wasn't close with Daryl, so I hitched a ride with a couple friends who knew him better. When the 3 of us stepped into his backyard, it was packed. It was actually impressive how many kids were there. I'd say at least a quarter of the entire grade was at this party. We wanted to say hi to Daryl because it would be the right thing to do coming into his party. We asked a couple kids we knew if they'd seen him. They said they hadn't seen him for a while now. So we asked others and got similar responses. We soon realized nobody seemed to know where Daryl was. Maybe he was in his house with a girl or something. So we just went about our own business. We played beer pong, people splashed around the pool, and the night became a daze overall. I didn't jump in the pool because I didn't bring a bathing suit and I just didn't want to get wet. Throughout the night, I would hear other kids screaming, "Where's Daryl?" It seemed others were trying to find him because it was weird he hadn't been seen for nearly 2 hours. Me and the 2 friends I came with joined a little circle of people talking about how Daryl hadn't been answering his text for a couple hours. Still, people were just chalking it up to maybe him being upstairs with a girl. Who knew? It was his party after all. Anyway, some more time passed and I had to go to the bathroom. There were a bunch of people inside the house, and there was actually a line for the bathroom. I opened a door in the hallway and it led to the basement. My house had a bathroom in the basement, so I figured there was a chance this one did as well. I turned on the light in the basement and walked down. I started looking for a bathroom. There were only 2 doors down there though. The first one led to a closet. There was another door on the other side of the basement. It was shut, so I went over to it and tried the doorknob. It was locked. I knocked on the door. There was no answer. The thing about this lock though, it seemed I would be able to pick it unlocked simply using my fingernail. So I did just that. I knocked again before opening the door. I was expecting to see a bathroom, but instead I saw a big pitch black room. It seemed to be a boiler room, However, there was the faintest little yellow light emanating from what appeared to be some kind of boiler machine in the far corner of the room. And in that light, I could see a person, surely a person, standing right in the back of the room. My heart dropped when I saw the person duck down behind something. I thought, what if that was Daryl? I looked for the light switch and found it. It was one of those hanging switches that you pull down. I turned the lights on and went over to where I saw the person hide. The room was cluttered with tables and a washer and dryer machine, so the walking space was kind of arranged in a circle. When I got to where I saw the person not even 20 seconds earlier, I saw Daryl laying on the floor in a bloody mess, apparently passed out. I looked back up to the door to the boiler room when I heard footsteps coming from that direction. There was someone rushing out the doorway, but for a split second they looked back and I instantly recognized the face of a kid named Todd from our grade. He was a very quiet kid that creeped out a large amount of people in our grade. Instead of calling the cops and tending to Daryl, I ran upstairs hoping to catch up to Todd to make sure there were other witnesses to his presence there that night. I made it upstairs to the hallway and started to scream for people's attention. Everyone who was in the living room came to look and could see Todd rushing out the front door. They saw him. They were now witnesses to his being there. I told them all to come downstairs and see what he did. I would have considered rushing to tackle him, but I didn't know what weapons he had on him. When we all got downstairs, we saw multiple stab wounds in Daryl's legs. First thing we did was call 911 for police and an ambulance. Daryl was rushed to the hospital, while at least 10 people vouched for me when I saw a kid in our grade named Todd at the scene of the crime. That same night, police apparently raided Tom's house and he was arrested. I'm pretty sure he's still in jail, not sure if they got him for attempted murder or what. Daryl is fine now, but everyone believes that Todd did what he did out of jealousy of Daryl's popularity. Todd didn't seem to have any friends in school and would often be picked on by kids in Daryl's friend group. I'm not saying Todd was justified at all, but it's scary what bullying can drive some people to do. When I bought my first house, I had a pool party on a Friday. It was supposed to be my housewarming party. I had a few of my closest friends over. Everyone drank a bunch, and a few hours later, people were on their way out. A couple friends were a little too drunk for me to allow them to drive home, so I offered them spots on the couches to sleep. I'll call those two friends Rob and Dan for the brief mentions they'll get in the story. By the time I went upstairs to brush my teeth and get ready for bed, I thought both Rob and Dan had already passed out on the couches downstairs. When I got into my room to change into my pajamas, I heard a splash in the pool in my backyard. I actually muttered to myself, what the hell are they doing? I went to the window to look out to the pool, and in the pool was one of them just standing in there. I was pissed because I knew there were no more towels outside, and now they'd have to bring their drunk asses in dripping all over my carpets downstairs. I opened the window and called out to whichever of them it was to get the hell out of the pool. Then, they turned their head to look up at my window. I had to squint my eyes because I couldn't tell if it was Rob or Dan. Whichever it was wearing a black shirt in the pool. I couldn't remember who was wearing what from earlier, to be honest. But whoever it was, they just had a staring contest with me. Like, for over 10 seconds, whoever it was just looked up at my window at me. I had grown impatient with them, so I went downstairs with my shoes on. But I froze at the bottom step when I saw both Rob and Dan fast asleep on either couches in my living room. My next course of action was running to the kitchen to grab the biggest kitchen knife from my knife holder and running outside. I turned the backyard light on before I went out so I could see. The pool was now empty. I walked to the edge of the deck to the pool and stopped. I looked into the pool, making sure no one was hiding at the bottom. Then I looked out to the further depths of my backyard, by the trees and bushes. In one of my trees, I was 90% sure I saw someone sitting on one of the thicker, lower branches. Even with the knife in my hand, I was still way too scared to go out there and confront the situation. I went back in my house, locked the door, and shut the blind on the door. I sat in the living room on the ottoman, feeling slight comfort being next to both Rob and Dan, even though they were asleep. I sat there just thinking and shaking when I heard this. A tapping at the sliding door to the backyard. I woke up Rob and Dan now, asking the two to check the yard with me. They came to the door, took one peek outside, and when they didn't see anything, they said ignore it and go back to sleep. It was the worst reaction I could have expected from them. Someone I didn't know was out there playing some kind of fucked up game with me, and it was honestly terrifying me. I stayed up that whole night, checking my window every few minutes just to make sure no one was in my pool. I didn't actually go to sleep until the sun started coming up. By the time I woke up, my friends were already gone. I texted each of my friends who came over to confirm they weren't out there messing with me or whatever. I then went to the backyard to do some detective work. I didn't find much, but I did find a mini stepping ladder planted right in front of the tree that I was so sure I saw someone sitting in last night. I grabbed the ladder and went to go put it back in the shed. However, I stopped when I saw someone looking out the small window of the shed. It was someone I didn't know. I dropped the ladder and ran to my house to call the cops. I stood by my kitchen window watching the shed the whole time I was on the phone with the police, and at one point the door to the shed opened, and some tall, creepish-looking dude with messy, medium-length black hair and a black t-shirt and cargo pants stepped out and walked to the gate. I gave the exact description on the phone, as well as to the cop who came to my door. I told the cop the whole story, but in the end, there wasn't much he could do other than write down the description of the guy. He suggested I install some security cameras and went on his way. And a week later, I already had a camera system installed. I was in my junior year of high school in 2009. I was sitting one regular school day in English class. It was towards the end of the year, and we were working on final projects, meaning we needed to use the school laptops. The school library was closed for the week because of some kind of damages or renovations. I really don't remember all the details regarding that. But even still, I was pretty sure the laptop carts were still being stored in the back room of the library. My teacher asked the class which of us would like to go down and get the cart. I really had to pee, so I raised my hand because it was a good excuse to go down to the bathroom anyway. After making a quick stop at the bathroom, I made my way to the library. The lights inside were all off. There didn't appear to be anyone in the entire library. It was pretty dark, but there was just enough light from the few windows in there to see where I was going. Like I said, the laptop carts were usually way in the back section of the library in a separate room. There was a glass window that looked from out in the main area of the library into this back room, and it was really dark in there. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. Now I looked around not knowing what to do. I didn't really want to go back to the classroom to tell my teacher. I looked around the library, hoping there was maybe at least one staff member in there. I did hear something coming from the other corner of the library, actually. As I walked closer, it sounded like some kind of consistent clicking sound. It was coming from one of the study rooms that classes would sometimes be held in. The door to this room was cracked open, but it was also dark in there. There were also windows that looked into this room, so instead of marching straight in there, I tried looking in through the window in the main section of the library. I was like 80% sure I could see someone standing in the back corner of this little room. I pushed the door open a little more and called into the room. My voice echoed a bit. I tried hitting the light switch, but the lights didn't turn on, confirming the power was shut off in the library. I stepped into the room, a bit confused why I didn't get an answer. I wanted to confirm that what I was seeing was a person. It's so hard for me to explain what I was seeing. It literally looked like a humanoid figure from the doorway. Head, torso, and everything. I didn't even have a cell phone back then to use to light up the room. I stepped deeper into this room, but I stopped when I started to become disturbed by what I was seeing. It didn't look like a person anymore. It looked like some kind of thing. Humanoid thing. I was pretty sure he or it or whatever was looking at me. I could make out a face on its head, which was easily twice the size of a normal human head. Not to mention how tall this thing was, maybe 7, 8 feet up. It was completely still, as was I, and it wasn't until I saw movement in the corner that my heart completely dropped and I ran out of the room and out of the library. I was breathing heavily, heart racing. A teacher I knew named Miss Carp happened to be walking by in the hall, and I asked her frantically to follow me into the library to see. She asked me in a stern voice why I was even going into the library, given that no one was allowed to enter that week. I told her that I was sent to get the laptops, and maintaining her stern voice, she told me all the laptop carts were moved to the presentation room. Apparently, I had zoned out when my teacher mentioned this. I told Miss Carp to follow me into the library anyway to show her what I saw. But when she reluctantly followed me there, not only was nothing there in that back room, but the light inside of that room was now working. Miss Carp was annoyed with me, and of course she didn't believe me or just thought I was seeing things. I eventually went back to class with a computer cart for the presentation room and explained to my teacher that I went to the library by mistake. I never really mentioned what I saw to anyone else for fear of sounding stupid or crazy. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or paranormal shit, but I really have no freaking clue what I could have seen in there. Sure, eyes can play tricks on you, but not like that. I saw something big in the corner of that room. Something not human. I went to a relatively small commuter college in Delaware. During my freshman year, I had my classes set up horribly. I would get to school at 3 p.m., have a couple classes, then a 2-hour gap before my next class, and I wouldn't leave campus until around 9. I'll admit, in my early years of college, I was kind of antisocial. I could have been trying to meet up with people in the food hall or joined clubs or even just went to the library during my breaks. But for my final class twice a week after my 2-hour gap, I would be in a basement classroom of one of the business halls. This basement only had this and one other classroom, and rarely ever would there be anyone else down there. Commonly, I'd just go straight down there, eat my food in the classroom, then just do homework on my laptop for the remainder of the couple hours. Or even just sit and play games on my phone or watch videos. Yeah, like I said, I was pretty antisocial. Well, one particular day, I felt lazy before class and didn't make myself food, so I had to go to the cafeteria hall to get a sandwich. I sat at a table alone and began eating, but quickly became uncomfortable after realizing I was the only one sitting alone at a table when a majority of everyone else there was sitting with friends. So I wrapped up the sandwich and decided I'd just eat down in the classroom and wait there like I usually did. I stepped out into the dark and marched back to the basement of the business hall and ate the rest of it there. Before I finished the sandwich, I heard the door creak open behind me. I was in the back corner seat right by the door, so when I turned, I was almost face to face with some kid I'd never seen before. He looked maybe a couple years older than me. He had this gross, overgrown beard, he wore glasses, he had a bit of a belly. Seriously, I'd never seen him in this class. We made awkward eye contact for a second until I looked away and continued eating. I made a mental note that the kid looked off, like he was weird or something was just not right about him. I saw in my peripheral vision the kid sit down in the desk literally right next to mine. I wanted to say so badly, why? Why are you sitting right there? But I just tried my best not to look at him and just ignore it. I looked at the time on my phone. There was still a whole hour and a half before class started. I looked up, not at the kid, but slightly looking to the left, just enough so I could see the kid looking at me. That was enough for me already. I finished my sandwich, picked up my bag, and walked out of the classroom. I didn't care where I was going. Maybe a bench outside, just not there anymore. When I stepped back outside into the darkness, I looked around for somewhere to go and sit for a while. I walked to the more woodsy section of campus and sat on a bench under a nice and bright light post. It was chilly out since it was late fall, but I'd deal with it. Not many students walked by this section of campus. It was by a pretty unused small parking lot surrounded by trees everywhere. Suddenly, I heard cracks and crunches of leaves. I looked around and spotted something. Between two pine-like bushes, there was someone standing there. I stood up and extended my neck out, I guess, to get a better look. It was that guy again. He wasn't even making an effort to hide his face. I was about to take off again when he cut through the two bushes and said hi. He started to talk to me, but the way he spoke was also off. He'd overpronounce everything, if that makes sense. He started asking me so many questions about myself, like if I go to school here, what my major is, where I work, what I do for fun. It was so painfully uncomfortable, but I tried to be nice by also asking him some questions. We ended up sitting down for a while. Eventually he asked for my number. I don't know why I gave it to him. I guess I was trying to be nice. Then he turned it weirder. He asked where I live. At first I answered with my hometown, but he said no, like, where do you live? I paused, not knowing what to say. I repeated my same answer. Then he said, no, like, what's your address? I didn't even ask him why he was asking that. I just said I gotta go and quickly walked away. When I looked back, the guy was following me. I didn't know what was wrong with him, but he was freaking me out. I skipped class that night and drove straight home. I crashed into bed and started doing my homework. After finishing a short paper, I checked my phone and it was full of texts from some random fake number. There had to be like 20 texts. They were all from that kid. It started with hey, then he worked down to you have a nice house. I suddenly felt a pain in my chest area. I replied back, go away or I'm calling the police. Then there was a knock at my window. I had the shade down, I couldn't see who it was. But along with the knock, I heard a muffled but familiar voice say, open the window. I yelled on calling the cops. Then he went silent. My mom and dad weren't home, so I really did end up calling the police. Nothing else happened before the police came. I showed them the texts and explained the whole story. They said, though, that it would be better to see if it continued, since the kid didn't actually make any threats yet. They left, saying call again if he came back to the house and to block his number. The next day, the college sent a text to all students' phones warning about sightings of a dangerous young man seen walking around with a knife. Classes were shut down for the day, and police searched the entire campus. I called to give my story and was asked to give it to the police again. As far as I know, that creepy guy was never caught. I don't know why he was targeting me, I don't know what his motive was, but this is the story about how I was almost murdered in my own home by someone I met at school. Back in high school, my group of friends consisted of about 10 people, but it would be rare that we'd all do things together. On a dark and cloudy school day, my friends Jared, Michelle, Christina, and I were all sitting in history together. We had a sub that day, and we weren't really doing any work, so everyone was just talking. Our high school was really old, like built in the 1930s, and there sat an old second building in the woods that was apparently used back in the 40s as some kind of daycare or preschool, and it just happened to be on the high school grounds, but they never tore it down. It was so old and decrepit it has vines growing on the side walls of it. The four of us were talking about how we should break into it that night since it was Friday. We didn't tell the rest of our friends because it would be harder to do with a lot of people. So nightfall came. We snuck onto the school grounds through a more hidden path to avoid security, and we easily made it towards the woods. We got to the building, which was in a fenced-off area. Jared and I boosted the girls up over the fence. Then we climbed over ourselves. The building was about twice the size of a house. There was no way we were the first ones to have been doing this. We scanned all four walls looking for a good entry point. There were multiple windows, and then we found the front door to the building. Locked, of course. Jared and I ended up breaking a window, but we had the girls keep watch. Once again, we boosted the girls up inside first, then Jared crawled inside, and lastly me. It took me a bit to squeeze in. I was the biggest one there after all. I actually cut my hands on some glass. After managing to get in, I looked around in the dark, cold room I was standing in. I realized it looked like an archaic, class-like room, but I also realized my friends weren't in there. I yelled Jared's name over and over. I left the little class-like room and entered a tight, decrepit hallway. There were a bunch of open doors leading to similar classrooms, but now I was more focused on finding my friends. I had no idea why they went ahead of me so quickly. I called their names again and again to no avail. I looked into all the tiny classrooms until I got to one, where I saw Jared standing in the corner. He was looking out the window. I said, "Dude, what the hell are you doing, and why couldn't you wait for me?" He just turned and looked at me, I guess. I couldn't make eye contact in that darkness. I looked down the hall again and called both girls' names. And with that, I heard someone stepping on something pretty loudly further down the narrow hall. I stepped through the mess of random school objects littered on the floor and got to the last classroom on the left. And the second I looked inside, someone jumped out and screamed in my face. I nearly had a heart attack, but it was Jared. Christina and Michelle came out from behind me, hysterically laughing. They revealed that they came up with a plan to hide from me to scare me a few minutes before going in. I playfully shoved Jared, but with my heart still racing from the scare, it started racing even faster, because I remembered that figure I just saw in that other classroom. I told them all to shh, and whispered I saw someone else and thought it was Jared. I waved for them to follow me back to that classroom, but whoever that person was in the corner wasn't there anymore. I stepped into the classroom, but it looked empty. Then I heard one of the girls gasp. I stepped back to them and looked at what the three of them were looking at. She was pointing at the crack between the door to the classroom. There was someone standing behind the door, with their face pressed up between the crack to the door. The two girls screamed, and Jared yelled, "Let's get out of here." We all ran back to the window we came in through. I was the last one to climb out, and I can't tell you how scared I was that I was going to be grabbed by the legs and pulled down as I was climbing through. But I made it out. We hopped the fence again and ran back to Christina's house. It didn't make sense. The door to the building was locked, and the window we smashed was the only open window. So how could that man have gotten in? Better question, what was he doing in there? We told the rest of our friends, and rumors quickly spread about the building. I'm sure others went in there after that, but we never went near that building again. My son George has always had the strangest friends. I'm not sure why, but in his earlier years, he always attracted what would be considered the weird kids. I've got a ton of stories about this, but there's one that kind of sticks out like a thorn. He was in the 4th grade, and we had just moved due to my husband's reassignment, so George was new to his school. He had always been an outgoing and friendly kid, so my husband and I weren't particularly worried about his ability to make new friends. We were transitioning well as a family, and everything was going well with him at school. I was beyond pleased the first time I met all of George's classmates' parents, as they all seemed like upstanding, honest people. A few months after the move, I got a call from George's school in the middle of the day requesting one of his parents come in to discuss an incident involving him and another student. My husband was at work, so I assumed the responsibility and agreed to meet with the principal after picking up my son. I remember feeling a mixture of anger and confusion. Anger, obviously. I mean, my son had probably been in a fight, which I'd need to punish him for should I find out he was the antagonizer. But confusion as well. Physical altercations were very uncharacteristic of George, which made this more concerning to me. As I was walking him to the principal's office, he refused to answer any of my questions about the situation, which was also very unlike him. Usually, he was extremely talkative and what you'd call an oversharer, so his silence was somewhat unsettling. I figured he was either embarrassed or scared, so I didn't think much of it. The principal asked that George sit in the waiting room outside his office, so that's where I left him. After closing the door, the principal directed me to a chair in front of his desk, which is where I sat down. He began asking me questions about George, the kinds of questions you'd expect. How is his behavior at home? Does he listen? Does he talk back? Is he respectful? You know, things like that. I had nothing but positive things to say. George was an extremely well-behaved and respectful boy, and that's not the mother in me. I was just telling the objective truth. Eventually, the principal told me why I had been called in. Apparently, George had gotten into a brief altercation with a classmate after recess, a boy named Sebastian. I asked about the circumstances of the fight, and this is what I was told. They had been the last two students outside, and they were walking up the stairs together. Seemingly out of nowhere, George pulled an eraser out of his pocket and struck Sebastian over the head with it, causing him to fall to the ground and start screaming. I was baffled. It was totally unlike George to do something like that without being provoked. Plus, I had heard about the Sebastian boy before. George spoke fondly of him, like they were close friends. I asked the principal more questions, but he didn't seem to have the answers, and ultimately admitted that no one had seen the incident, but both boys had independently confirmed details of the story. He then said that George wasn't in trouble, as a little fight wasn't too uncommon. He told me that he just wanted to inform me, and that no further action would be taken, which definitely calmed me down. After that, he excused me, so I left. George was still silent about the whole thing as I drove him home, and only opened up to me right before bedtime. Admittedly, I had grown frustrated with him for not talking to me, which was probably why he quit the silent act. He told me that Sebastian had tricked him. I asked him to elaborate, and he told me that they had been playing make-believe Street Fighter. As per Sebastian's instruction, George had pulled out an eraser for a KO move of some sort. Out of nowhere, Sebastian fell to the ground and pretended to be really hurt. He then whispered in George's ear that he'd seriously hurt him if George didn't pretend like he'd attacked him. So that's what George did, and all the teachers assumed it had been a real fight. Rightfully so, I was pretty pissed. My little boy had been taken advantage of and falsely accused. Instead of going to the school, I decided to handle things myself. That night, I went through the school's directory and found Sebastian's mother's phone number. She introduced herself as Maggie. I was kind of taken aback by how sweet and genuine she sounded on the phone. She told me she had heard about the incident, gotten the real story from Sebastian, and already reprimanded him. I thought it was kind of odd that Sebastian would have told the truth to his mother so soon, but I was happy I didn't have to do any convincing. She then went on to say that Sebastian had always had some minor behavioral problems growing up, and he'd sometimes think and act like another person entirely. I actually started to feel bad the more she told me. It seemed as if he wasn't fully in control of some of his actions. Maggie suggested that the boys schedule a sleepover to make up for the whole thing and become better friends, which I thought was a great idea. She offered to host, and I was appreciative of that. That weekend, I drove over to her house with George, who had returned to his bubbly, talkative self. Maggie invited me in, and the two of us got to know each other over some wine while the boys played in the basement. Like I said before, Maggie seems like a completely upstanding person, and I really enjoyed her company. I ended up staying for a few hours, and the time flew by. Eventually, I just had to ask about Sebastian's behavior, as it had been bugging me for a while. Her entire demeanor changed, and she lowered her voice a bit. She told me that he often had trouble making friends, and that he's seen a few doctors, all of whom think it's something he'll outgrow soon. She went on to say that he's gotten much better at controlling himself, and the fact that he was being more social at school was a good sign. I didn't inquire much more than that. I just wanted to make sure my son would be safe for the night. Maggie promised me George would be in good hands, and that Sebastian didn't have a history of getting physical or violent, more so just acting strange. That was enough reassurance for me. This woman was clearly genuine, and it actually felt kind of nice knowing that George would be helping Sebastian learn how to make friends. Eventually, it came time to leave, so I went downstairs to say goodbye to George. The two boys were laughing and playing Battleship. It looked like they were really getting along. I kissed my son goodbye and drove home. The next morning, I went to go pick him up. When I got to the house, He was waiting near the door with all his stuff and a smile on his face. I assumed the night went well. I said good morning to Maggie and packed George's stuff in the car. As we were driving away, though, he started bawling out of nowhere. I asked him what was wrong in a concerned voice, and what he told me was quite literally jaw-dropping. George said that everything was going well until it came time to go to sleep. The boys had set up their sleeping arrangements in the basement, 2 air mattresses side by side. Everything seemed normal when they went to bed, but at some point in the night, George woke up. He wasn't sure why at first. Then he heard something. Whispering. It was coming from the bathroom. The door was slightly open, and there was a strange flickering light inside, not like a regular bathroom light. As George described it, it seemed more like a candle light. He listened closer and realized it was Sebastian talking. But he wasn't just talking, he was having a full conversation. George thought maybe he was on the phone or something, but the more he listened, the weirder it got. Sebastian wasn't calling himself Sebastian, he was calling himself Mr. Jim. George felt frozen. It was like Sebastian thought he was someone else, and he wasn't talking to anyone, just the mirror. Then the candle went out. Everything was dark again. George squeezed his eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. A long time passed, and then he heard the bathroom door creak open. His stomach dropped when he heard whispering again, this time right above him. It went on for a while. George didn't understand the words. It didn't even sound like English. He just lay there, too scared to move. Eventually, Sebastian went back to bed like nothing happened. In the morning, he was totally normal again. George didn't dare ask him about it. When George told me what happened, I was horrified. My gut told me this wasn't just a case of childhood imagination. Something was wrong. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to tell someone. I called Maggie first. At first, she laughed it off, saying Sebastian has always been a creative kid, but as I pressed her, her voice faltered. Eventually, she admitted that his so-called behavioral problems were more serious than she let on. One psychiatrist had even suggested he was showing signs of multiple personality disorder. They had already moved twice before, she told me in a hushed tone, because Sebastian had been kicked out of school. I was stunned, furious even. Why the hell hadn't she told me this before? Why would she put my son in danger like that? Then she did something unexpected. She begged me not to notify the school. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to respect her wishes, but another part of me knew that something was very wrong. I blurted out, "Okay," and hung up the phone before she could respond. I told myself I'd make my decision by the end of the week, but I never got the chance. That Monday, Sebastian full-on attacked another student at recess. It was serious enough that the school sent out a statement to all the parents, though they kept the details vague. By the end of the day, I found out that he had been expelled. I tried calling Maggie, but her phone had seemingly been disconnected. The situation was incredibly unsettling. Just days ago we had spoken, and now, suddenly, she was unreachable. I didn't even know what I wanted to say to her, just that I wanted to say something. There were no other numbers or emails in the school directory, just that one number that was now disconnected. A few days later, the curiosity got too overwhelming, so I bit the bullet and drove to her house. When I arrived, it was completely vacated. No moving trucks, no sign of a rushed departure, just gone. It didn't make sense. How could they have left so quickly? I tried looking them up, searching for any trace of them online. I found nothing. No forwarding address, no mention of them anywhere. It was like they had never existed at all. That was a long time ago, and George wasn't too badly affected by it. In all honesty, I think he's mostly forgotten about it. I haven't, though. I often think about what could have happened to my son that night in that basement, or what kind of things that kid Sebastian has been doing since. My upbringing was a little unorthodox. I grew up in a Southern Baptist household. The kind where we didn't believe in ghosts, but were absolutely certain about demons. Let me explain. If something strange happened, it wasn't a spirit or wandering soul. It was something darker, something biblical. I never fully bought into it, but the message was drilled into me from a young age. Rejecting demons meant rejecting scripture itself. My mother, though, was different. Faith was optional for her. She wasn't atheist or agnostic, just indifferent. She'd say things like, "God and I have an understanding," whenever I pressed her about church. While I leaned into religion as a source of structure and stability, she drifted further from it. It was one of the many things that widened the gap between us. I won't sugarcoat it. My mother struggled with addiction, mental health issues, things she never wanted help for. Some days she was functional, others she was downright insane. I tried not to take it personally, but it was hard. Looking back, she definitely had schizophrenia or some kind of adjacent condition. But before you say anything about my family being neglectful of her mental health, it was a different time back then. One afternoon, I had a nightmare so vivid that I still remember every detail to this day. In the dream, I was lying in bed when my mother stormed into my room, screaming in a fit of rage. She grabbed me by the wrist and started shaking me violently. I woke up in a pool of sweat, my body still rigid with fear. But before I could shake off the dream, it happened again. Except this time, I wasn't asleep. The door barged open, and there she was, just as she had been in my nightmare. Same expression, same unhinged anger, same words. It was like the dream had been some kind of prophecy. I barely managed to push her off and yell for her to stop, and then it was over. She left as suddenly as she had entered, and when I confronted her the next morning, she had no memory of it. She seemed confused, even a little hurt that I was so shaken. I told myself it was a coincidence, some bizarre overlap between my subconscious and her moods, but part of me wondered if it was something worse. A few weeks later, I heard her screaming from the backyard. It was a strange sound, not a panicked scream or even a distressed one. The scream sounded more excited. I don't even know if that makes sense, but that's the best way I can describe it. I rushed outside and froze at what I saw. My mother was standing in the yard, grinning, holding a massive 7-foot-long snake in her bare hands. That was terrifying enough on its own, but there's something you don't know which made it even worse. My mother had a lifelong phobia of snakes. She couldn't even look at them on TV without recoiling. But there she was, gripping one like it was a toy. She said, "Come here," and motioned for me to grab the snake. I took a step back, shaking my head. I literally said, "Mom, what the hell?" But the look in her eye told me she couldn't even understand the words I was saying. She just smiled wider and tilted her head like she was trying to scare me. I couldn't deal with it. I turned and ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding. I peeked out the window and saw her still standing there, holding the snake like an offering. Eventually, she let it slither onto the ground and walked back inside as if nothing had happened. Later, when I asked her about it, she shrugged like I was making it up. She told me I must have had a strange dream and refused to entertain me when I continued to ask about it. That was nothing compared to what I'm about to tell you, though. That winter, my church held an overnight lock-in. I was relieved to go. Church was my escape, a place where I could be around predictable, normal people. My mother dropped me off completely sober and even kissed my forehead before driving away. At around 4:30 a.m., just as we were settling into sleep, a loud knocking echoed through the chapel. We all sat up, glancing at each other. The knocking moved, traveling around the building in an impossible way at times. It sounded like it was coming from multiple directions at once. It wasn't wind, it wasn't an animal. It was rhythmic, circling the chapel like someone or something was trying to break in. The pastor, the only one with a key, was asleep in his office and hadn't heard a thing. I ran to wake him, and as soon as he stepped into the chapel, the knocking stopped. He opened the front doors and literally stumbled back in fear. Standing there, barefoot and sweating in the freezing air, was my mother. Her clothes were disheveled, and her hair was dripping with sweat. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. She didn't acknowledge the pastor. Her eyes locked on me immediately. A slow, unsettling smile stretched across her face as she walked toward me. I wanted to run. The pastor tried to hold me back, whispering, "Stay here." But I felt completely powerless, like I had no choice but to go with her. I climbed into the car, afraid that she was going to do something, but she didn't. The drive home was silent. She didn't speak, didn't explain. She didn't answer when I asked why she was there. When we got home, she stopped in the doorway and just stared at me. She stood there silently watching me as I walked to my room. I closed the door, locked it, and lay awake for hours, listening. In the morning, she was in the kitchen cooking breakfast. She was cheerful and clearly oblivious to what had happened the night before. She jumped back when she saw me, saying she was just about to pick me up from the church. I felt the blood drain from my face. She had no memory of knocking on the church doors, no memory of driving me home. It was freaky. I expected someone, the pastor, a church elder, even one of the chaperones, to say something about what had happened, but no one did. It was like they didn't know what to make of it, or worse, they didn't want to. That's kind of the way people treated my mom back then. That was decades ago. She's gone now, but her memory is something that will never leave me, for better or for worse. I don't know if I believe in demons or the supernatural anymore, but I can't explain what happens. The logical explanation is that she was suffering from mental illness, maybe addiction withdrawal, or maybe something else entirely. But the memory lapses, the eerie timing, the way she acted like a different person some nights, it still haunts me. I tell myself there's a rational answer for all of it, but even now, I'm not sure I believe that. My eldest son started sleepwalking when he was about 8 or 9. I had heard of kids going through phases like that, so I wasn't too concerned at first. It was just one of those things. A little unsettling, sure, but nothing I thought much about. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so none of my kids have ever been able to sneak around the house at night without me knowing. That's actually how I first figured out about my son's habit. Most nights, I'd wake up and find him standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, rocking slightly on his heels, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes would be open, but they weren't seeing anything. That was the one part that always got me. For any of you who have lived with a sleepwalker, you know exactly what I'm talking about. His gaze would pass right through me, empty and distant, like he was looking past me into something I couldn't see. It was always extremely strange, and I never fully acclimated to finding him like that. Sometimes he'd mumble something under his breath, words too soft and slurred to understand. Other times, he wouldn't make a sound, just standing there, breathing in that slow, steady way that somehow made it even worse. I'd gently guide him to bed, whispering his name, telling him everything was fine. He never seemed to remember any of it in the morning. Things escalated a few months after I made the realization that he was a sleepwalker. One night, I woke up to a rhythmic tapping sound. It sounded like water droplets repeatedly dripping onto a window pane, only it wasn't raining outside. It was soft, barely loud enough to wake me. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, some far-off noise that my half-asleep brain had misinterpreted. But as I lay there, the sound continued, steady and deliberate. It wasn't sporadic like rainfall would be. It occurred at regular intervals, and always at the same volume. I kept listening, trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't the house settling, and it wasn't the wind outside. It was too precise. Once I realized the tapping wasn't going to stop, I begrudgingly accepted that I'd have to deal with it. I sat up and looked towards the door, which is where the sound was coming from. My husband was fast asleep, and I didn't want to disturb him. I should mention that I wasn't scared, just curious. Otherwise, I probably would have woken him up. Anyway, I got out of bed to investigate. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw him, my son, facing the wall, his forehead lightly knocking against it in slow, measured taps. His fingertips gently grazed the wall in rhythm with his forehead taps, as if he was trying to walk through it. I remember calling his name, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react, just kept pressing his head forward, knocking it in that eerie rhythmic way, like he was testing something, like he was trying to push through. I stepped closer, but right before I was about to intervene, I hesitated. Something about the way he was moving genuinely sent a chill right through me. I gently reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, shaking him just enough to pull him out of whatever trance he was in. He blinked, took a step back, and then, as if nothing had happened, let me lead him back to bed. He never mentioned it in the morning. It happened a few more times, but it was pretty infrequent if I'm being honest. I figured it was just another strange habit of sleepwalkers. Maybe some kind of subconscious response to the wall being there. Some internal sense of space that his dreaming mind hadn't accounted for. And eventually, he outgrew it. The sleepwalking stopped, and the strange, vacant staring in the hallway became a weird little memory that I mostly forgot about. That is, until my younger son started doing the same thing years later. The sleepwalking, I mean. At first, I brushed it off. Kids go through phases. Some behaviors repeat themselves. It was just so uncanny that both of them started sleepwalking around the same age. Again though, nothing too unusual. Genetics are a fascinating thing. But eventually, I started noticing the little details. The things that gave me a growing sense of concern. It wasn't just that he sleepwalked. It was how he sleepwalked. He stood in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes open but unfocused. He moved the same way as my older son had, with that slow, eerie rhythm, like his movements weren't completely random. It was unsettling. It felt like I was living the memory of watching my older son do the same thing years earlier. But it got worse than that. One night, I woke up to that tapping noise again. I already knew what I'd see before I stepped into the hallway, and I was right. There he was, forehead pressed to the exact same spot, knocking against the wall like he was trying to step into something that wasn't there. It was the exact same behavior my older son had exhibited all those years ago, from the forehead taps all the way down to the way his fingers brushed against the wall. I called his name. Nothing. I touched his shoulder. Nothing. He just kept knocking, his small body swaying slightly, lost in some deep, unreachable place. And that's when it hit me. He had never seen his older brother sleepwalk. At least not that I know of. His brother hadn't done this in years. There was no reason for him to exhibit the same exact behavior. Not just the wandering, but the standing, the tapping, the eerie, misplaced urgency of it. I don't know why, but that thought made me feel sick. After some badgering, I eventually snapped him out of his trance. I guided him back to bed and tucked him in like I had done so many times before, trying to tell myself that it was just one of those things. And then, just like his brother, he outgrew it. Just like that, no more sleepwalking, no more tapping. He had no recollection of it either. For years, I didn't think about it. In all honesty, I had forgotten about the whole thing, but there's a reason I'm writing this now. My sons are away at college now, and the house is a lot quieter than what I'm used to. Because of that, my husband and I have to find new things to occupy some of that downtime with. A few weeks ago, we decided to renovate the house. The house is pretty old, and we've lived in it long enough that we've decided to change things up. New floors, new paint, some fresh updates to make the place feel new again. It was all minor work, nothing too intensive. We were stripping the old wallpaper when we noticed something underneath. At first, I thought it was just some old backing or maybe a weird stain, but as we peeled more away, my breath caught. It was an old, antique-style mirror, a mirror that had been covered for some reason. My first thought was, why the hell would someone cover a mirror instead of removing it? I felt ridiculous, standing there staring at a piece of glass like it was going to do something, but I couldn't help but feel like we weren't supposed to find it, like it had been sealed away for a reason. And that's when I realized the mirror was positioned in the exact spot on the wall that my sons had been bumping into all those years ago. The memories came flooding back, and I stood there in shock. There was no logical reason they should have known it was there. They couldn't have, and yet somehow they had. Both of them had independently been trying to walk into something that was impossible to see through the wallpaper. Forget about the fact that they were unconscious. I immediately got rid of that mirror, but I'm still pretty freaked out by the whole thing. There's got to be some kind of rational explanation for this, but I can't think of one. I still don't know what to make of this. I really don't. This happened a few months ago. I've been driving for Lyft for a few years now, and I usually stick to late night shifts. The roads are quieter and the tips are better, but there is a trade-off. Every once in a while, you get a story that sticks with you, and not in a good way. I'd always thought of myself as careful. I've dealt with my fair share of odd passengers, but nothing, and I mean nothing, even came close to being as strange as what I'm about to tell you. I didn't have a dash cam at the time, and that night was the main reason I installed one. It started off normal enough, just me and the odd sounds my car would occasionally make. I've got this beat up 2005 Volvo, but it's reliable as hell. The streets were quite literally deserted, which like I said earlier, I preferred. Sometime after 2 p.m., I got a request from a convenience store nearby. Seemed harmless at first, but for some reason, I got this weird feeling in my gut about it. You ever get that feeling like something's off, but you can't explain why? That's exactly what hit me as I drove up. Before I even saw the guy, I figured out why I was getting that gut feeling. The convenience store I was pulling up to was closed. All the lights were off, and there was not a single car in the lot. As I pulled closer, I saw him. I made sure to drive pretty slowly so I could get a good look at him. He was pacing outside the store, wearing this ratty hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in years. I'm not kidding about that. There was literally a hole in the sleeve. His movements were jerky, like he couldn't stand still, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he thought someone was after him. If I had to guess, he was on something. I probably should have just canceled the ride and driven away. I even hovered my finger over the cancel button, but I didn't for whatever reason. I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat without a word. I regretted my decision the moment I took my foot off the brake. Most people either scroll on their phones or stare out the window, but not him. He just sat there, staring at me through the rearview mirror, not blinking, not looking away, just staring directly at me. I tried not to stare back, but I couldn't help but catch his eye a couple of times. He looked kind of angry, which was also pretty unsettling. I tried to ignore him and turned on the radio to break the silence. I don't even remember which station I clicked on, but the moment the music started playing, he snapped at me to turn it off. His voice was deep and a little raspy, and I could tell he was a smoker right away. That kind of caught me off guard, and I jerked the steering wheel a little bit. I resisted the urge to look at him in the mirror and just did as he said, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I didn't say anything, and we drove in silence for a while. I thought maybe he'd just sit there quietly until we got to his stop. That's what I was hoping for, at least. But then he spoke. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. He asked me if I ever picked up someone I shouldn't have. That question hit me like a brick. I let out this awkward laugh and said, "Well, I hope not." I was trying to keep it light, but he didn't react. He just leaned back and muttered something to himself that I couldn't hear. Then he started going on about how he used to be an Uber driver and he quit because some punks stole some stuff from his car. He was slurring his words a bit, so I couldn't make out everything he said, but I got the gist of the story for the most part. I looked in the mirror once or twice while he was telling me the story, and I realized he was smiling the whole time, which was incredibly unsettling. A normal person wouldn't smile talking about something like that. He concluded his story by saying, "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." That comment was what did it for me. I started thinking about him as more of a threat than just a crazy drug addict. Unfortunately, there wasn't much I could do about it. I felt my pulse speed up. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was spinning. I glanced at the GPS, focusing on the destination like it was some kind of lifeline, but the guy did not know when to stop talking. He kept babbling about nonsense, some of it concerning and some of it just gibberish. I honestly couldn't keep up. Eventually, he started apologizing to someone, although I don't think it was me. He began insinuating that he had just done something awful and that he was a bad person. He kept saying, "I didn't mean it," repeatedly, followed by a few frantic "I'm sorries." I didn't respond, worried that he'd do something if I did. I didn't know what he'd done or what he was capable of, but I wasn't about to find out. We were only a few minutes from his stop when he snapped out of his muttering haze and yelled at me that I had missed the turn. I didn't miss it. The GPS clearly showed we were on track, but I slammed on the brakes anyway, mostly out of fear. He demanded that I pull over, so that's what I did. My hands were shaking at that point. I just wanted the nightmare to be over. As soon as I shifted into park, headlights appeared behind us. It was a police car. I said a silent prayer and watched as it crept down the road, its spotlight briefly sweeping over my car. The guy in my back seat slouched down like he was trying to stay out of sight. I turned my head and saw him lying almost perfectly flat on my back seat with his eyes closed. I whipped my head back around before he saw me, trying to keep my breathing steady. He stayed in that position for a really uncomfortable amount of time. I wanted to ask him to leave, but decided against it. Eventually, he lifted his head and told me I had gotten lucky. Before I had a chance to do anything, he opened my car door and disappeared. I ended up calling my shift short after that. I was shaken up and didn't feel like driving around anymore. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I came across something on my phone that proved how dangerous of a situation I had been in. According to a news article, a convenience store had been robbed on the night I picked up that passenger. It was 2 blocks from where I had picked that guy up. It makes me sick knowing I was inches away from a dangerous criminal who could have harmed me if he had chosen to. I'm a little scared to contact the police about this. I try to avoid law enforcement for various personal reasons I won't get into. I'm not really sure if my report would even help. Either way, I'm much more cautious about who I let in my car. I used to live in the city. The urban lifestyle is honestly what I always envisioned for myself. I'm not going to get into it, but after an extremely traumatic experience, I couldn't bear even the smallest noises. I began to hate noise in general. My psychiatrist told me I had developed a rare case of phonophobia. So that pins and needles feeling you get when your foot falls asleep. It's kind of like that, but in my chest. Always there, like my body was bracing for something that wasn't coming. Every car horn or slamming door felt like a jolt straight to my nerves. I couldn't keep living like that. About 3 years ago, I found a cabin buried deep in the Pacific Northwest. I don't want to say exactly where it was for reasons you'll soon understand, but all I'll say is that it was somewhere in Oregon. It seemed perfect. Very few neighbors, no traffic, barely any cell service. What really sold me on it, though, was the lack of noise. It was just me and the peace and quiet. For the first time in months, I thought I might actually feel safe. The cabin itself was small but cozy. To be fair, it was exactly what the listing had promised. You could tell it had been built to last, with thick wooden beams and a sturdy stone fireplace. It smelled like pine and old books when I first walked in. You know, that kind of earthy scent that's almost comforting. Think like one of those old cabin-style bed and breakfasts. For any of you who have gone skiing before, the nearest neighbor lived about a 10-minute walk down a narrow dirt path. I didn't meet her right away though. For the first few days, I just soaked in the silence. I'd wake up to the sound of birds instead of sirens, and at night, the only thing I heard was the wind brushing through the trees. It was like the whole world had pressed pause, and I could finally breathe again. I did all my work from my laptop, so there really was no need for me to connect with the outside world beyond that. About a week after I moved in, there was a knock at the door. The cabin obviously had no doorbell, so those knocks were something I'd have to get used to. I opened the door, expecting it to be my neighbor, and it was. It was a moderately old woman carrying a basket of preserves like she just stepped out of a Hallmark movie. She introduced herself as Michelle and told me she lived about 10 minutes down the trail, which didn't sound far at all until you factored in how dense the woods were. I mean, you could get turned around in there just looking for firewood. She was in her late 60s with oddly long gray hair and these piercing blue eyes that made you feel like she could see right through you. She wasn't rude exactly, more like blunt. She welcomed me to the woods and extended the basket toward me like she was expecting me to take it. I didn't really have much of a choice. She was practically shoving it in my face. I know it sounds hospitable, but her vibe seemed a little off, if that makes any sense. I grabbed it impulsively, but I admit I had never been treated that way by a neighbor before. It wasn't anything crazy, but it wasn't something I was used to. I thanked her as I took the basket, and she looked at me like she was expecting me to say something else. I honestly didn't know what else to say, so I just smiled. She kept staring at me awkwardly, which confirmed my suspicion that this woman didn't interact with a lot of people. Eventually, she spoke. She said, and these were her exact words, which I'll never forget, "Always keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than your axe." It wasn't something a normal person would say to someone else. It was like she was reciting from a rule book. It honestly sounded more like a warning than advice. I nodded, smiled, and turned to go back inside. After shutting the door, I stood there in silence, waiting to hear her footsteps walk away. She didn't walk away for a good 45 seconds, which was probably the strangest part about the whole interaction. Despite the weird vibe, I did appreciate her kindness. She seemed reclusive, but not unfriendly, the kind of person who'd help you if you asked, but wouldn't go out of her way to pry. I told myself it was nice to know someone was close by, even if I didn't plan on needing her. I didn't even bother looking in the basket. I just set it down in the living room and forgot about it. There was a thunderstorm that night, which is extremely rare for Oregon, but it does happen. I lit a few candles and curled up on the couch with a book, trying to ignore the fact that the power was flickering every few minutes. Some of you might find that kind of isolation scary, but I actually loved it. For some reason, my brain wasn't freaked out by the natural sounds of the thunderstorm. It was actually that specific storm which gave me that realization. I listened intently to everything outside, and it was, dare I say, soothing. But of course, that peaceful feeling didn't last. A few hours after the storm started, there was a knock at the door that nearly made me jump out of my skin. I say knock, but it was really more of a banging. It was loud and definitely not natural, like whoever it was didn't care that it was pouring outside. My heart started pounding, and I began to feel that god-awful, tingly sensation in my chest. After hesitating for a few seconds, I grabbed a flashlight and got up to check who it was. I looked through the little glass window pane next to the door. It was Michelle, soaked to the bone and clutching a flashlight. I opened the door, and she spoke before I even had a chance to greet her. She blurted out that she saw someone near my woodpile and that I should know about it. I was beyond confused, but her words were incredibly concerning, and that took precedence. I stepped out onto the porch, shining my flashlight into the rain, but I couldn't see anything but trees. I asked her if she was sure, and she nodded. Her eyes kept darting to the woods like she was expecting someone to emerge from it any second. The whole thing was pretty freaky. I kept looking around, but there wasn't much I could make out between the darkness and the chaos of the storm. Before I could say anything else, she told me to be careful and began walking away without waiting for a response. I watched her head back down the path toward her cabin, clearly unfazed by the pouring rain. I stood there until the glow of the flashlight disappeared out of sight, and then I went back inside. The literal second I shut the door, I realized her story was riddled with holes. How could she have seen someone near my woodpile if her house was 10 minutes away? She must have been on my property to begin with. Why the hell would she be snooping around my cabin during a thunderstorm? Was she lying? It didn't sit right with me, but marching over to her house in the middle of a thunderstorm was the last thing I was going to do. Still, I had to do something. I locked up the cabin as securely as I could and sat in my room, listening. The storm started to die down after a while, but I still felt pretty uneasy. A few more hours passed without incident, so I decided that it was probably safe to go to sleep. I can't remember exactly what time it was, but sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of a branch snapping just outside my bedroom window. I'm a really light sleeper, so I was 100% positive it was a branch snapping and not something else. I froze in place for a few tense seconds, listening. Eventually, I crept to the window, half hoping I wouldn't see anything. At first, I didn't, but then I spotted her. Michelle. She was standing at the edge of the woods, her body angled away from my house. I could tell it was her because her hair was so long and disheveled. I strained to make out more, but being as there was only moonlight to help me see, it was no use. I saw her beginning to turn around, so I ducked beneath the window before she could catch me looking at her. I stayed crouched there for what felt like forever. When I finally mustered the courage to peek again, she was gone. I genuinely didn't know what to do. I hadn't exactly pegged her as dangerous, just weird. But at that point, I was having second thoughts. It didn't make sense. Why would she try and warn me earlier if she was the one poking around? I didn't sleep for hours. I was pretty dead set on just staying up until sunrise. A few hours passed, and I was starting to get tired. As I finally began letting my guard down, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't like the banging from earlier. It was actually kind of quiet. Still, I wasn't going to get up under any circumstances. The pins and needles started up again as I quietly made my way over to the door. I took an inconspicuous glance through the pane and froze in horror. It wasn't Michelle. It was a burly-looking bald guy with a thick beard. I had to fight every bone in my body not to yell out in fear. The situation instantly went from a 6 to a 10. As quietly as I could, I retreated to my bathroom, locked the door, and called the police. As I was on the phone with them, I started to hear banging on the front door, like someone was repeatedly smashing it with a heavy object. The operator told me help was on the way and instructed me not to hang up. I sat there more terrified than I'd ever been in my entire life. Eventually, the front door gave way, and I heard it crash open. I genuinely thought I was going to die. That man, whoever he was, started smashing things in my cabin. At least that's what it sounded like. All I could hear was the sound of glass breaking and wood splintering. I didn't dare make a sound. Luckily, that man didn't seem to look for me, because I never heard his footsteps leave the living room. Eventually, the smashing sound stopped, and I was sitting in complete silence again. I had been fighting off a panic attack the whole time. To my surprise, the police actually arrived pretty quickly, but not soon enough to catch that guy in the act. He was long gone. I pleaded with the officers to help me out, but they were downright useless. They did a pathetic search of the surrounding property, but that was it. They wouldn't even agree to search the woods, saying that it was too dense and they were unlikely to find him there anyway. I begged them to accompany me to Michelle's house at least, which they agreed to. When we got to her property, my jaw literally dropped. The entire cabin was abandoned. The cops confirmed this and said no one had lived there in decades. I told them they had to search it for squatters, but they told me there was no reason for them to do that. They tried to tell me that there was no clear signs of habitation, so it would be a waste of time. I damn near lost my mind when I heard them say that. I tried to argue, but they more or less told me that living in the woods was a risk I was taking and was not their problem. They left after that, which infuriated me. I obviously moved out of that cabin, but not before spending one more night there. It was awful, but I made it through without anything happening. Things have been good for me since then, but I still constantly think about this experience. Some of my superstitious friends have theorized that Michelle was actually a spirit that was trying to protect me, and that she was really just trying to watch over my property for whatever reason. I don't believe in the paranormal, so I think it's much more likely that two people, her and that man, had been squatting in that abandoned cabin. I just still don't understand why they decided to target me, or why Michelle would bother to warn me if she were planning on breaking into my house. I don't think I'll ever know. My name is Luke. My girlfriend Catherine and I met 3 years ago as freshmen in college. We go to Stanford, which has been my dream school since I was like 8. Neither of us are from California. Pretty far from it, actually. We're both from Ohio. Her from Cincinnati, and me just outside Columbus. I think that's a big reason we were so attracted to each other. I think people from similar areas are naturally drawn to each other for whatever reason. Stanford's not a huge school, but most of the student body is originally from California, so us being from the Midwest definitely differentiates us. One of the traditions we've created is how we split Christmas between our families. Catherine's popular amongst my relatives, so her presence is always appreciated and welcomed, damn near expected at this point. Since her house is just a 2-hour drive from mine, we decided early on to spend Christmas Eve with my family, who celebrates Christmas Eve night, and then drive through the night to her house for Christmas Day. Until I met her, I didn't realize that most families celebrate Christmas the day of, not the night before. Oddly enough, my favorite part of the holiday isn't Christmas Eve or Christmas Day though, it's that late night drive. It's become its own little tradition, something we both look forward to every year. The first time we did it still remains one of my favorite memories with her. Because of where I live, the quickest route from my house to hers doesn't take us on a major highway. Most of the route is quiet back roads, just fields, trees, and the occasional distant farmhouse. It's always really late at night when we do it, so in combination with the secluded route, we rarely encounter any other cars. It feels like the world is asleep, and we have it all to ourselves. Don't laugh, but we always blast Juice WRLD during the drive. His music has been a shared obsession since we met. I know his music is a little cringy, but something about singing the lyrics together is really special. It's like we're in sync. This past Christmas Eve started like any other. After a wholesome night with my entire extended family, we packed up my car around midnight and hit the road. The snow was falling lightly, and the roads were deserted as expected. With the music and heat cranked up, everything felt perfect. That all changed in an instant though. What I'm about to describe to you is still one of the most unsettling things I've ever experienced. Probably the most unsettling thing. I was driving along when the music was interrupted by my phone ringing. I glanced down, a little irritated that I'd be getting a call this late. It was an unknown number. I ignored it without thinking. Probably a scam call. Those things are constant these days. Catherine made a joke about how committed those call center guys must be making calls on Christmas. I laughed in agreement, and that was that. But then, a few minutes later, my phone rang a second time. I again looked down and saw that it was another unknown number, probably the same one as before. I sighed, irritated, but let it go to voicemail. Catherine glanced at me and raised her eyebrow, but didn't say anything. I tilted my phone towards her to show her that it was an unknown number, and she said, "That's so weird," with a confused look. I didn't respond. Instead, just shrugged my shoulders. The music eventually resumed, and I tried to take my mind off the phone calls. But of course, not 2 minutes later, my phone rang again. I was pissed at that point, cursing under my breath as I fumbled wildly for my phone. I snatched it from the console and swiped aggressively across the screen, ready to tell whoever it was to screw off for spamming my phone. I could tell I startled Catherine, as her body tensed up with my sudden movements. In hindsight, I probably overreacted, but I was sick of being harassed. I basically barked hello into the phone with as sharp a tone as I could muster. I expected the scam script to begin, but I was instead met with silence. I turned up the volume in my car and immediately picked up on a faint static coming from the other side of the line. I was about to hang up when a man's voice spoke. The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. "Hello, Luke." I was so caught off guard I nearly swerved off the road. I couldn't speak. I felt my whole body starting to itch, which always happens to me when I'm nervous. Before I could respond, the man continued. He started reciting personal information, my full name, my address, details about my life that no stranger should know, details that no stranger could know. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to pull over on the side of the road, but I kept driving like I was in some kind of trance. I considered shouting at him, but decided that anger wasn't the best resource in a situation like this. After he paused for a few tense moments, I finally spoke. I asked him what he wanted in a steady voice, trying to hide the fear I was feeling. The voice paused before delivering the words that made my blood run cold. He said that he wasn't here for me, that he was here for Catherine. Hearing my girlfriend's name was about 100 times more terrifying than hearing my own, and the horrified expression on her face told me that she was just as shocked as I was. I blurted out that I didn't know a Catherine, that he must have the wrong number. The man chuckled before saying, "She's sitting right next to you." That was too much for me. I pulled over on the side of the road. I had no choice. My hands were literally shaking in fear. I was about to say something when Catherine reached into my lap in one fluid movement and hung up the phone. Just like that, I literally screamed in her face, demanding to know why she hung up on a stranger that was making personal threats towards us. She didn't answer, just looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. I desperately tried to call the number back, once, twice, 3 times, but it never went through. Catherine told me to keep driving, which I ultimately did, but not before questioning her. She told me she was scared and that I couldn't blame her for hanging up, which I guess was fair. I drove off in silence, but I still couldn't understand why she'd hang up the phone. I don't know whether I was more furious or afraid. Part of me was expecting that number to call back, but after about 10 minutes, I felt like it was increasingly unlikely. At one point, I looked over at Catherine and saw tears in her eyes. She told me she didn't feel safe, which I empathized with. Something in the pit of my stomach gnawed at me, though. Catherine and I had been through enough in our relationship to know that trust didn't always come easily. There had been little things, white lies, half-truths, moments where I caught her being less than honest. I knew I was being paranoid, though. How could she possibly have done anything to do with this? The rest of the drive was silent. I didn't play the music again, and neither of us spoke. My mind was still spinning with a million unanswered questions. Who the hell was that guy? How did he know so much about me? Only my family knew where we were driving that night, and they'd never pull a stunt like this. I was 100% sure of it. I couldn't think of another explanation, though. Even when we finally pulled into Catherine's driveway, I didn't feel much better. It's been almost a month since this happened, and I have yet to get my answers. Neither of our family members were responsible. We asked all of them. Catherine swears she's just as clueless as I am, which leads me to believe the person on the other end of the phone call had sinister intentions. You might think I'm overreacting to a harmless prank, but I'm telling you, other than our family members, there are no people on Earth who knew Catherine and I would be driving that night. I've been really tense ever since. I can't help but brace myself every time my phone rings. I know he's going to call me again eventually. It's just a matter of time. When shit hit the fan with my parents, I had to move out. I was down on my luck living situation-wise, and I could only crash on the couches of my friends for so long. I was looking on all the roommate and apartment apps and websites, and I found something that caught my eye on this app. A man named Luke had listed a room for rent in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house. The rent price was $1,200 a month. He'd basically be my landlord and roommate, as he would also be living in the house. He made sure to note on the ad that he'd be out of the house most of the time, and that the renter would have the place to themselves often. He did put in all capital letters a few ground rules though, including no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and no use of the basement. They seemed like pretty standard rules. I went to view the house in person and meet Luke. The second he opened the door, I got a bit of a read on him, that he was a little reclusive. His demeanor was quiet and a little awkward. He showed me the house. I could tell he was nervous because his voice would shake and he would stutter. The bedroom was a good size, and the actual floor plan of the house was good. It was an open layout, meaning the kitchen, living room, and dining room were all one big open space. For $1,000 a month in my area, it was a steal. He laid out some more ground rules in person, and he emphasized again how I can't go in the attic or the basement, as I use them for storage only. Sounded fair enough. On the spot, I told him I'm interested. We shook hands, I left, and 2 days later, I was moving in. We didn't draft any sort of lease or contract. I was just going to be paying him off the books month to month, the first day of every month. I had settled in pretty quickly. The bedroom I was renting was already furnished with a bed and basic furniture, so all I did really was hang some of my wall decor and fill the dresser and closet with clothes. The bedroom had a lock on it, thankfully, and he gave me the key to it so I could lock it when he wasn't home, which seemed like a nice gesture. At first. Luke never told me what he did for work. He just told me he usually wouldn't be home, but I quickly learned that wasn't true. Anytime I'd come home from work, his car was always in the driveway. Quickly, I started to pick up on loud sounds outside of my bedroom at night, from footsteps to doors opening and closing constantly. One night, I went out in the middle of the night just to go to the bathroom, and I noticed the basement door was opened. I walked over to the top of the stairs and looked down. There was a dim light from down there, seemingly from a far corner out of view. I heard banging sounds coming from down there. It was like 2 a.m. What could he be doing down there? Then the bangs stopped, and Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me. It was so creepy that describing it in words doesn't do it justice. He looked visibly annoyed as he looked up at me. I apologized and said, "I'm just going to the bathroom." He almost angrily responded, "Shut the basement door." I listened to him, insanely weirded out. I went to the bathroom and then back to bed. I laid awake for a while after that, now with my mind racing, wondering what he's doing. About a week later, I returned home and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it before leaving every day. I looked around my room to see if anything was missing, and while nothing seemed to be missing, I noticed some things had been moved. For starters, my clothes in the dressers were not neatly stacked anymore. They had been looked through, I could tell. The closet door was also cracked open. It was dawning on me that he had his own key, and he likely came into my room and went through my stuff. This felt like a clear invasion of privacy and a violation of my tenant rights. I had to figure out how to confront him about it. I went to knock on his bedroom door, but he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway once again, so he had to be home. I was getting such weird vibes from all of this. I gave up and went back to my room after microwaving my dinner. While I was in my room relaxing and watching TV, I heard the door to Luke's room open. I took this opportunity to get up and confront him, so I went out to the living room and caught him in a hurry about to leave the house. I stopped him and asked if he went into my room. He looked at me with a blank expression and straight up said no. I delicately responded without being hostile, saying that the door was unlocked and some of my stuff appeared to have been gone through. He then claimed that I had the only key to my bedroom, and then he said he's in a hurry, he has to go, and he left. I was flabbergasted by all of this. I wanted to ask my parents for advice, but at that time I hated them and wanted nothing to do with them. I was already back on the apps and websites looking up other listings. I knew I didn't want to stay here. Then I realized this was the first apparent time that Luke wasn't home while I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to check out the basement. I checked out the windows first to make sure his car was gone, and it was. I then went over to open the basement door. Oddly enough, I couldn't find any light switches, so I just used the flashlight on my phone to navigate around. The steps were so creaky, I felt like I was in an abandoned house. I got to the bottom, and there was a tan carpet that was curling upwards at the walls as if it were poorly fitted to the floor. It was a very small basement, at least the main room. There was just this one ugly couch in the middle of the room. There was also a slightly funky smell down there, and the smell only got worse as I got closer to this door in the corner. I attempted to open the door, but unfortunately it was locked. Or maybe I should say fortunately, because I'm not sure I fully wanted to know what was in there emitting that smell. It almost smelled like raw sewage, but worse. I did one little quick sweep around the main room of the basement though, and I found nothing, just some taped up cardboard boxes which I was not going to open. I went back upstairs and shut the door. The rest of that night I stayed in my room. I never heard Luke come back. He must have gotten back after I had fallen asleep. I woke up. The room was still dark. My alarm was not going off. Something else had woken me up. I heard the floor next to my bed crack, and I turned and saw Luke leaning over my bed, looking at me. I screamed, and he replied to me to shush, and then asked me if I went into the basement. I screamed, "No, how did you get in here? I locked the door." He then asked me, "Are you sure?" I flipped the cards on him and yelled, "Did you come into this room when I wasn't home?" He replied no. Then he turned around and walked toward the door. I asked, "How did you get in here then?" I saw him hold up his hand in the dark. He wasn't holding anything. At the time, I didn't know what it meant. He said to me before leaving the room, "I think you should find other living arrangements." And then he closed the door. I started packing my shit right then and there. I wasn't staying another minute in that house. I knocked on his door and yelled at him to give me half of the rent money back since I'd only been there like 2 weeks. Moments later, he opened the door, and just his arm stuck out from the door. holding a small stack of $100 bills. He managed to make even handing me the money insanely creepy. I grabbed it. It was only $400. Whatever, it was close enough. I just wanted to get out of there. I was fully packed and out of there within an hour. I slept in my car that night. I ended up back at my parents' house the next day, and after explaining the ludicrous shit I just went through, something changed where they were more welcoming to have me back. I still moved out a month later, but my parents and I are fine now. If you're choosing to have a random roommate from online, just be careful and use your best judgment after meeting them. It was my junior year of college. I had moved off campus into a student apartment building. My roommate was sort of assigned to me by the school, in the sense that he was just someone else who needed someone to live with. His name was David, and he seemed like a nice guy at first. He was friendly and polite, always smiling and making small talk. But as the days went by, I started to notice strange things about him. Little quirks and odd behaviors that made me feel uneasy. It started with the way David would always linger in my room, asking pushy questions about my personal life and poking around my belongings as if he were way too comfortable doing so. At first, I brushed it off as harmless curiosity, even if I found it kinda weird. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Then there were the sounds I would hear coming from David's room late at night, talking and shuffling noises that were slightly concerning. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just David watching TV or talking on the phone. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, unable to sleep because of the strange noises coming from David's room, I decided to investigate. I crept silently down the hallway and pressed my ear against David's door, straining to hear what was going on inside. What I heard was just weird. It was the sound of David whispering to himself, his voice low and muffled. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispers stopped, and there was nothing but silence. Then I heard, "Jeff?" David said my name. Did he somehow know I was outside his door? I quickly and quietly tiptoed away from his door and back to my room. I silently crawled back into my bed. I didn't know what to make of this. Why was David talking to himself? Was he hiding something from me? Or was he sleepwalking? But then how did he know I was outside of his room? I couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness. The next day, I kept thinking about the night before. As the days went by and the sounds from David's room persisted, my paranoia only grew worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that David was hiding something from me. David's behavior also became stranger. I started to notice little subtle changes in his behavior, like he would make strange glances at me, and his movements seemed a little furtive. One night, I woke up at some off hour in the night and heard David's whispering voice from outside in the hallway, like right outside my door. It was genuinely freaking me out, and I was wondering if he was sleepwalking. I went to the door and put my ear up against it, and like last time, the whispering stopped. And then, David once again said, "Jeff?" This time I replied and said, "Yeah, you good?" He didn't respond. I just heard his footsteps walk away to his room. The following night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door closing. I heard David's footsteps walking away in the hallway. This was getting out of hand. The next day, I decided to confront him about his potential sleepwalking. I told him I'd been hearing him walking around late at night and heard him close my door last night. I then asked him if he has ever been known to sleepwalk or have any kind of sleeping disorders. He seemed to not know how to answer at first, but then he said yes, he does tend to sleepwalk sometimes. I wasn't buying it though, something was up. I decided to search David's room for answers. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I waited until David was out of the apartment, then I crept into his room. I knew that I might not have much time, so I searched quickly, tearing through drawers and closets in search of anything that might explain David's nightly strange behavior. And then, just as I was about to give up, I found it. A small, nondescript drawer hidden at the back of David's closet. I pulled it open, and my blood ran cold at what I found inside. It was a collection of photographs, dozens of them, mostly featuring me asleep and one other guy who looked to be our age, all mixed together. They were taken from different angles and distances, some of them so close up that I could see the pores on my skin and individual strands of hair on my head. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized what I was looking at. David had been secretly taking pictures of me while I slept without my knowledge or consent. I couldn't believe it. I had been living with some kind of sick voyeur, like he probably got off somehow to these pictures. He had been violating my privacy and invading my personal space for who knows how long. I wanted to confront David, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what he might do, afraid of what he might say, afraid of what might happen if I confronted him alone. So I took a picture of the contents of the drawer, and then took a handful of the photos as evidence to use against David. I packed my things, and the next day, I showed the photos to the department in charge of student housing accommodations, and they told me to let them take the appropriate action. I was lucky and got assigned to a different apartment with a normal person who needed a roommate. I never spoke to David again. Even now, years later, I still can't shake the memory of those chilling photographs, and David's whispering and creeping around at night. I never found out who the other guy in the photos was. It was definitely his old roommate, but I was never able to find his name. But who knows? Maybe he also found out. When I was 23, I had to move out of state for work. I still work with the company, but I've been able to move back to my hometown and work at the local office here. But at the time, I needed somewhere to live that wouldn't be bank-breaking. I made a posting on basically all the websites for a roommate: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, and even on my neighborhood subreddit. I had a guy named Rob reach out to me on Facebook, stating he has a room available in his place. I looked at his pictures to see if he looked like a somewhat normal guy, and he did. I was open to the idea of having a male roommate, as long as they seemed normal, even though my parents were very against it. Rob and I FaceTimed, during which he gave me a virtual tour of the place. Apparently he owned the place outright. It was a modest house in the middle of town, only a 10-minute drive from where my office would be. He also seemed pretty nice. I didn't get any bad vibes at all. His price was fair, and his rules were pretty fair too. He said it was available to move in right away, which was perfect. So it was settled. A week later, I had all my things packed and drove down. I met Rob right out front of the house, where he greeted me and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed about him was he was really short. He was eye level with me. He helped me bring some of the bigger and heavier bags inside. He showed me my room, which was furnished already. He said one of his friends had been living there and recently moved out. I replaced all the pillows and bed sheets with my own, of course. The rest of that day was me settling in. Rob, I could see, was trying to get to know me and presumably make me feel at home. I didn't get any overly friendly vibes yet. The next day was Sunday. Rob offered to drive me around town to show me around. I wasn't eager to, but I said sure, just to get off on a good start with him. He drove us around town, showing me where the good shopping centers are, good restaurants, and stuff like that. But then he offered to get us lunch. I really wasn't hungry, and he was suggesting a sit-down lunch, almost like a date. I didn't want him to get any kind of wrong idea, I just needed a room. I said I'm not hungry, and then he right away suggested we go grab drinks somewhere instead. I politely shot it down too, saying I don't drink on work nights. He was being a bit pushy, saying, come on, just a couple drinks. I still maintained my politeness and said another time. He gave up, and he went really quiet all of a sudden, like he was upset. I'll admit, I was slightly uncomfortable, but nothing I couldn't handle yet. That week was my first week at work, and so my attention was focused mostly on adjusting to the work week. It wasn't until a few days into the week that I got home and did my laundry and noticed my hamper full of clothes seemed moved. Like the clothes weren't how I remembered they were left, and it wasn't until I was loading the washing machine that I noticed a pair of my underwear was missing. I checked my room top to bottom like 5 times. It was gone. I had a disturbing thought. What if Rob... No, I refused to believe that just yet, and there was no chance in hell I would confront him and ask him that. Still, I was now starting to wish there was a lock on the bedroom door. That weekend, I bought a lockable doorknob from Ace Hardware, and while Rob wasn't home, I swapped out the current doorknob with the new one. Now I could leave the place in peace. I figured I'd tell Rob the next time I saw him. He didn't come home that night, though. He must have been working. His schedule seemed pretty random. That night, I awoke to banging on my bedroom door. It was Rob. He was saying my name, and he didn't sound happy. I checked the time, and it was like 1:30 in the morning. I decided I would pretend I'm asleep. I was honestly kind of scared to open the door. I had a feeling it had to do with the doorknob, and I was right. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of texts from Rob saying, "We need to talk. Be home after work." I simply responded, "Is this about the doorknob?" And he responded back, "Yes." I apologized to him and said I was planning on telling him. He replied back, "It comes off today." I was getting incredibly nasty and weird vibes from his tone. My next response I thought out a little longer, and basically said how I hope he can sympathize and understand that I'm a girl and I just feel safer being able to have privacy in my room. He responded a little nicer this time, but he still basically said no to my request and that the old doorknob needs to go back on. I was confused, I was upset, but I had to respect his rules. I did also install it without telling him, so I felt like he had a right to be kind of mad. But how did he know I changed it? It's not like I had the old doorknob sitting out in the open. The idea that he tried coming into my room that night kind of scared me. I changed the doorknob back the next day and returned to Ace. This is where things went really downhill though. There was a knock at the door one day when Rob wasn't home. It was a girl around my age. She asked me if I was living here with Rob, and I said yes. She warned me to get out of there immediately, that Rob has multiple restraining orders against him from different girls, and he's known to be a very dangerous, creepy stalker. I was at a loss for words. I asked her how she knew I was here. She said she knew that he was trying to rent his room, and that it's not surprising he opted to have a girl move in. She said she saw me moving in and wanted to wait till he wasn't home to come warn me. I thanked her so much. I truly was terrified now. I had already paid Rob for the entire month. I didn't know what to do. She said she would help me in any way she could. I took her number and she left. I started packing my things and looking for other places I could move to. I found something across town, a studio apartment sublet for a little more money. I contacted the poster of the ad, and she told me I could move in as soon as possible. Perfect. Now I just needed to tell Rob and get my money back. I started packing some of my stuff into my car, and I texted him that I'd have to be moving out tomorrow, as something with my family came up and I needed to go home. He didn't answer. He got back to the house about an hour later and asked me about my text. I came up with my best fake story possible, and he said yeah, he'll give me the money back tomorrow after he goes to the bank. I was super relieved. About an hour later, he knocked on my door, and then said, "Did by some chance some girl say something to you?" I simply said, "No, what do you mean?" And he said, "Never mind, it just seems like you're running away out of here for another reason." I insisted that it was purely because of the family reasons. He said okay, and left. Sadly, the story didn't end there. I woke up that night and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw a black figure sitting on the end of the bed. It was Rob. He turned and put his hand on my mouth and went, "Shh." I said, "Please don't hurt me." And he responded, "Why would I hurt you? I knew someone said something to you. Don't believe what these girls say." I said, "You're scaring me," and this part is still just as insane to me as it was in that moment. He started to caress my leg, and he said, "I don't mean to scare you," right after I said he's scaring me. I got out of the bed and ran for the door, and he screamed at me to stop. I ran outside with my phone in hand and called the police. I hid in the bush until they showed up, and I explained the entire situation to them. They made Rob come outside and give his side of the story. Basically, I told them I just want to get all my stuff out of the room and I'm leaving. So the cops stayed there as I collected the remainder of my stuff and brought it all to my car. I also insisted on Rob Venmoing me the money back while the police were there, and he did so actually. The whole time the police were there, he tried his best to act like some normal dude, I could tell. One of the officers then pulled me to the side to tell me that this guy had been arrested before for other incidents with women, but Rob denied ever coming in my room or touching me or anything, so it was all he said, she said. I left the house and went straight to a hotel for the night. The next day, I moved into the studio apartment. Luckily, the girl who posted it was able to facilitate my quick move-in. I have never and will never live with another man who's not my boyfriend or husband ever again, or just anyone I don't know for that matter.